Picture, if you will, the cradle of our beginning, a time so distant that the continents themselves sat differently upon the mantle of the earth, and the stars above formed constellations that no modern eye has ever seen. We drift back, millions of years, descending through the strata of time, through the layers of ice and rock, until we arrive under the relentless golden gaze of the Pliocene sun. Here, in the sprawling, fractured expanse of the East African Rift Valley, the world was a theater of heat and dust. It was a landscape of violent beauty, where the earth was tearing itself apart, plate pulling away from plate, creating a cauldron of evolution where only the most adaptable would survive. The air here vibrates with a shimmering intensity. To stand in this ancient valley is to stand inside a kiln. The heat rises in visible waves from the cracked earth, distorting the horizon, making the distant acacia trees dance like ghosts in the vapor. But it is not merely the heat that defines this world. It is the wind. The wind is a constant companion to our ancient ancestors, a restless, invisible spirit that prowls the savannah. It does not blow with the cool moisture of the ocean, for the jungle canopy that once sheltered this land has retreated, leaving behind an open, exposed world. This wind carries with it the grit of the earth, tiny, sharp particles of silica, volcanic ash from the smoldering peaks of the rift, and dry soil that has been pulverized by the hooves of 1,000 thundering beasts. In this harsh and unforgiving nursery, where the sky is a vast, unblinking blue and the ground is a tapestry of thorns and ochre dust, the eye was the most vulnerable of treasures. Consider the paradox of the eye. It is an organ of supreme complexity, a soft, wet jewel evolved from the light-sensitive spots of ancient sea creatures, now forced to exist in a world that is fundamentally hostile to its nature. The eye is water-loving, a descendant of the aquatic realm, yet here it must function in the driest of hells. It is a biological contradiction, a membrane of exquisite sensitivity that must remain open, exposed, and unshielded to do its work. To see was to survive. This is the fundamental law of the open plains. In the dense rainforests of our deeper past, the world was auditory and olfactory. The smell of rot and fruit, the call of the troop in the canopy. But here, on the savannah, the sensory hierarchy shifted. The horizon stretched out for miles, and death could arrive from any direction. To spot the tawny hide of a lion moving imperceptibly in the tall, golden grass required a vision that was clear and unblemished. To distinguish the ripe tuber from the poisonous root, or to see the shadow of a raptor crossing the sun, required an optical instrument of high precision. And so, nature provided a shield. Long before tears held the weight of sorrow, long before they became the liquid language of heartbreak or joy, they were merely a functional river. They were a saline wash designed to cleanse the windows of the soul. This was the first tear, the basal tear. It was not a sign of feeling, but a mechanism of maintenance, a quiet physiological hum shared by the wolf, the antelope, and the ape. It was a fluid of pure utility, keeping the delicate cornea moist against the biting dryness of the savannah wind. Let us slow down the clock of history and witness the life of a single ancestor in this epoch. She stands barely 4 feet tall, a bipedal hominin, covered in fine dark fur that ripples in the hot breeze. She is not yet human, but the blueprint is there. She stands atop a rocky outcrop, scanning the valley floor. The sun is at its zenith, a blinding white disk that bleaches the color from the world. As she stares into the distance, the wind picks up, swirling a cloud of fine, abrasive dust into her face. In a creature without the blessing of the basal tear, this dust would be a sentence of death. A scratched cornea leads to infection. Infection leads to blindness. And in the Rift Valley, a blind animal is already dead. But within her skull, nestled in the hollow of the orbital bone just above the outer corner of her eye, a tiny almond-shaped gland springs into action. It is the lacrimal gland, a silent factory of salvation. It does not wait for a command from the conscious mind. It does not require her to feel pain. It operates on a loop of ancient, autonomic logic. With every blink, her eyelids descend like the shutters of a camera. This is a motion so fast, taking merely a fraction of a second, that she is unaware of it. But in that fraction of a second, a miracle of hydraulic engineering occurs. The upper eyelid acts as a wiper blade, sweeping down across the surface of the eye. As it moves, it draws a microscopic film of fluid from the lacrimal gland and spreads it evenly across the cornea. This fluid is not merely water. If it were, it would evaporate in seconds under the African sun, leaving the eye dry and gritty. No, the basal tear is a complex chemical cocktail, a tripartite shield evolved over millions of years of trial and error. At its base, clinging directly to the surface of the eye, is a layer of mucin, a sticky, mucus-like substance that anchors the tear to the cornea, ensuring the water does not bead up and roll away like rain on a waxed leaf. Above that lies the aqueous layer, the saltwater river that hydrates the cells and carries oxygen to the avascular surface of the eye. And finally, floating on top, is a microscopic layer of lipids, oils secreted by tiny glands along the rim of the eyelid. This oil is the seal. It prevents the water from evaporating into the hot air. It creates a smooth, optical surface, polishing the rough terrain of the eye into a perfect lens. Every time our ancestor blinks, she is resurfacing the lens of her camera. She is washing away the dust of the rift. She is fighting a microscopic war against the elements, a war fought with ammunition made of salt and water. There was no emotion here, only the silent biological imperative to keep the eyes open, watching the horizon for the threats that lurked in the long shadows of the afternoon. Imagine the tension of her existence. She descends from the rock, moving into the high grass. Her head swivels constantly. The survival of her lineage depends on her ability to process visual information. Is that a shadow or a leopard? Is that a termite mound or the hunch of a hyena? The air is thick with pollen and grit. Without the constant bathing of the basal tear, her vision would cloud within minutes. The cornea, dried out, would become opaque, like frosted glass. But the tears flow, a ceaseless, invisible river, keeping the window clear. This adaptation was not unique to her, but for her species, it was critical. Other animals, the grazers and the hunters, relied heavily on scent and hearing. The rhinoceros could charge at a sound. The dog could track a smell for miles. But the primate path, the path that would eventually lead to us, was a path of vision. We were becoming visual specialists. Our snouts were shortening, our olfactory senses dimming as our brains reallocated resources to the visual cortex. We were betting our entire evolutionary future on the ability to see. And that bet depended entirely on the ability to maintain the instrument of sight. Thus, the tear was the unsung hero of the Stone Age. It was a silent witness to the dawn of humanity. It washed away the ash of prehistoric volcanic eruptions. It flushed out the pollen of the first flowering grasslands. It soothed the eyes of the first toolmakers as they chipped away at flint, protecting them from the flying shards of stone. It was a mundane, daily miracle. As the epoch dragged on, the climate fluctuated. The wet cycles brought monsoons that turned the dust to mud, and the dry cycles turned the mud back to stone. Through it all, the hominin eye remained moist. This persistence allowed our ancestors to become endurance hunters. We could run for hours in the midday heat, tracking prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. While the prey panted and struggled, their eyes crusted with dust, the human hunter blinked and saw clearly. The tear allowed us to outlast the world around us. But let us look deeper into this fluid. It is a remembrance of where we came from. The salt content of the basal tear is not accidental. It is a chemical echo of the primordial ocean. Hundreds of millions of years ago, life existed only in the sea. The eye evolved underwater, bathed constantly in the saline solution of the ocean. When life crawled onto land, it faced a crisis. How to take the ocean with it? How to keep a marine organ functional in an air-filled world? The body's solution was to internalize the sea. We carry a portable ocean within us, and the tear is the tide that washes over the shore of the eye. Every blink is a return to the womb of life, a brief immersion in the ancestral waters. In the silence of the genome, mutations were shifting, refining this system. Those with better oil glands in their eyelids could keep their eyes open longer without blinking, allowing for a steadier gaze when aiming a spear or staring down a rival. Those with more efficient drainage ducts, the tiny puncta in the corners of the eyes, could cycle the fluid more rapidly, flushing out irritants before they caused damage. These were not dramatic changes. They were subtle shifts in the code of life, slight adjustments to the plumbing of the skull. But over thousands of generations, they compounded. The sun sets over the Rift Valley. The heat breaks, replaced by a sudden chilling drop in temperature. The wind dies down, and the dust settles. Our ancestor retreats to the safety of a grove of trees or a rocky overhang. She huddles with her kin. The fire has not yet been tamed. The night is dark and full of terrors. Here, in the gloom, the basal tear continues its work. Even in sleep, the eyes move beneath the lids, and the fluid circulates. It fights the bacteria that gather during the day, the microscopic invaders seeking purchase on the warm, wet surface of the eye. The tear contains lysozyme, an enzyme that destroys cell walls, a natural antibiotic that keeps the window clean and sterile. It is a humbling thought that the clarity of your vision today, as you look at the world around you, is the result of this ancient struggle against the African dust. The machinery of your eyelids, the perfectly balanced chemistry of your tears, the drainage systems that empty into your nose, all of it was forged in the kiln of the Pliocene. We are the inheritors of this survival technology. We are the children of the dust and the children of the water that washed it away. As we moved out of Africa, spreading into the colder, darker corners of the world, the challenges changed, but the need for the basal tear remained. In the freezing winds of the Ice Age tundra, the tear prevented the eye from freezing, the warm blood of the body transferring heat to the fluid. In the smoke-filled caves of the Neanderthals, the tear flushed away the soot and ash of the hearth. It has been with us at every step, a silent saline companion, asking for nothing, yet providing the clarity required to build a civilization. But in the Rift Valley, under that relentless sun, the tear was not yet a symbol. It was not yet poetry. It was simply the difference between life and death. It was the lubricant of survival. And as our ancestor drifts to sleep, her eyes moving in the rapid rhythm of dreams, the tears wash over them, preparing her for another day of heat, another day of wind, another day of watching the long horizon for the shadow that moves. And so, the stage was set. The hardware was in place. The eye was hydrated. The connection between the gland and the surface was perfected. But deep within the wiring of the brain, a new connection was about to be made. A connection that would turn this waste disposal fluid into a carrier of the soul. The dust had been conquered. Now, the body was ready to confront the storm within. The transition from the physical to the emotional is not a sudden leap, but a slow, winding river of adaptation. As the millennia turned like pages in a book of stone, the hominin brain began to swell. The neocortex expanded, folding in upon itself, creating new valleys and peaks of gray matter. We were becoming smarter, yes, but we were also becoming more socially complex. The solitary vigilance of the early hunter was giving way to the intricate dance of the tribe. In the gathering twilight of the Paleolithic, the nature of survival began to change. It was no longer enough to simply see the lion. One had to navigate the treacherous waters of social hierarchy, bonding, and kin selection. The threats were no longer just physical, they were emotional. Exclusion from the group was a death sentence effectively as swift as the leopard's bite. In this new social landscape, communication became the primary weapon. And here lies the mystery, the ancient accident that rewrote our destiny. In most animals, the lacrimal gland is wired strictly to the reflex nerves. Dust hits the eye, the nerve fires, water flows. Simple, efficient. But in the developing human brain, the wires crossed. The signals from the limbic system, the primal seat of fear, anger, and bonding, began to leak into the lacrimal network. The hypothalamus, the conductor of our stress response, found a new pathway. Imagine the first time it happened. A subtle shift in the code of life. A mutation in the regulatory genes that guide the growth of neurons. A young hominin, perhaps separated from its mother, felt the rising tide of panic, the cortisol flooding the blood, the heart hammering against the ribs. In any other creature, this panic would result in a vocalization, a yelp, a scream, a howl. And indeed, the hominin surely cried out. But this time, something else happened. The immense electrical storm of stress in the brain overflowed its banks. It surged down the parasympathetic nerves and hit the lacrimal gland. The gland, obeying this new, confused signal, did what it was designed to do. It released water. Tears spilled from the eyes, not because of dust, not because of wind, but because of fear. This was the birth of the psychogenic tear, the emotional tear. It was likely a biological glitch, a side effect of our rewiring brains. But evolution is a scavenger. It seizes upon mistakes and repurposes them. This mistake turned out to be a stroke of genius. Consider the environment of the early human camp. It is night. The fire has burned down to embers. Silence is crucial. To scream is to attract predators. To scream is to annoy the dominant males. To scream is to break the peace. But the young child, or the injured adult, needs help. They need to signal distress. The tear offered a solution that no other signal could provide. It was a silent scream. A face streaked with tears catching the flicker of the firelight is a high-contrast visual signal. It says, "I am in distress," without making a sound. It allows the vulnerable to broadcast their need for help to those close by, parents, mates, kin, while remaining invisible to the predators in the dark. It created a private channel of communication, a frequency of intimacy. To see a tear, you must be close. You must be within the circle of trust. This new tear was different from the basal tear of the Rift Valley. It was heavier. It was laden with proteins and hormones. If we could place a drop of this ancient emotional tear under a microscope, we would see the chemical signature of suffering. We would see ACTH, a stress hormone. We would see leucine and enkephalin, a natural painkiller. The body was learning to use the eyes not just to see the world, but to flush out the toxins of the mind. As the generations passed, this trait was reinforced. The infants who cried tears were cared for more attentively. The tears elicited a deep biological response in the observer. We are programmed to react to them. When we see tears on another human face, our own brain activity shifts. Mirror neurons fire. We feel a phantom echo of their pain. The tear became the glue of the tribe, binding us together in a web of shared empathy. But let us not forget the cost. In the brutal calculus of the wild, every adaptation has a price. The price of the emotional tear is high. When you cry, your vision blurs. The very mechanism designed to clear your sight now obscures it. The salt stings. The eyes swell. You become effectively blind to the threats of the horizon. You cannot aim a spear while weeping. You cannot track a gazelle while sobbing. To cry is to voluntarily disarm oneself. This is the evolutionary duality of the tear. It is a surrender. By crying, the early human was saying to their tribe, "I am helpless. I am not a threat. I cannot see to fight you." In a species prone to violence where intrasexual competition was fierce, this signal of submission was a lifesaver. It de-escalated conflict. It turned aggression into pity. It was a white flag raised in the middle of a dispute, dissolved in salt water. So, as we moved from the dusty plains to the complex societies of the Stone Age, the tear transformed. It ceased to be merely a windshield wiper and became a social tool of immense power. It allowed us to navigate the treacherous landscape of the human heart. It allowed us to mourn the dead, marking the transition from animal grief to human sorrow. It allowed us to forgive. It allowed us to love. And yet, the ancient dust of the Rift Valley is still there, lurking in the physiology of the weep. Even today, when you cry because of a broken heart or a moment of overwhelming beauty, your body is using the same hardware that your ancestor used to wash away the silica of the savannah. The globus sensation, that tight lump in your throat, is your glottis widening to gulp more oxygen, a vestige of the fight-or-flight response, preparing you to run or scream even if you are just sitting in a chair. Your nose runs because the drainage ducts are overwhelmed, the same ducts that once kept the nasal passages moist in the arid heat. We are walking museums of our own history. We carry the Pliocene in our eyes. We carry the memory of the wind and the sun. And every time a tear falls, it is a journey through time, a droplet of water that connects the dusty struggle of the first hominin to the complex emotional inner life of the modern human. The wind of the Rift Valley no longer blows against our faces in the same way. We have built walls and windows to shut it out, but the need for the tear remains. The world is still harsh, though in different ways. The dust of the modern world is stress, anxiety, loss, and the overwhelming speed of life. And just as the basal tear washed the grit from the cornea, the emotional tear washes the grit from the psyche. It clears the vision of the soul, allowing us to see once again what truly matters. So, as you rest now, let your eyes close. Feel the gentle weight of the lids. Feel the moisture that gathers there, the silent, faithful work of the lacrimal gland. It is a system that has not failed in 2 million years. It is watching over you, keeping the windows clear, waiting for the morning light. You are safe in the hands of your own biology. The dust has settled. The tribe is close. The fire is warm. And the water of the eye, that ancient oceanic gift, is there to heal you. As the eons drifted by like clouds over the serif of the mountains, the great wheel of the world turned, grinding the lush, verdant paradises of the past into dust and memory. The planet was cooling, the moisture locked away in the growing polar caps, and the great green ocean of the African rainforest began to recede. It pulled back like a tide, leaving behind a new and terrifying stage for the drama of life, the open savannah. This was a world of exposure, a landscape of golden grasses that whispered in the wind, of scattered acacia trees standing like lonely sentinels against a sky that was too big, too blue, and endlessly watching. It was here, in this theater of light and shadow, that our ancestors began to change. They stood taller, unraveling the crouch of the ape, straightening the spine until they peered over the top of the tall grass. They shed the safety of the trees, that three-dimensional world of branches and canopy, where escape was always a vertical leap away. They stepped down onto the perilous plains, trading the sanctuary of the leaves for the vulnerability of the ground. This was the era of the walker, the traveler, the creature who would cross continents on 2 feet. But with this new stance came a profound vulnerability. The soft underbelly, once protected by the earth in a quadruped, was now exposed to the world. The eyes, once accustomed to the dappled gloom of the forest floor, now had to scan a horizon that stretched to the edge of the world. The sensory world of the early hominid was one of acute, vibrating alertness. To walk upright in the Pleistocene was to walk through a landscape of fear. We were not the masters of this domain. We were merely tenacious interlopers, striving to carve out a niche between the giants. The land belonged to the lions with manes like black fire. It belonged to the saber-toothed cats, the meganterion and the Dinophilus, nightmares of muscle and fang that specialized in cracking the skulls of primates. It belonged to the hyenas, whose bone-crushing jaws could dismantle a skeleton in minutes. In this world, silence was not merely the absence of noise, it was a shield. It was a physical wall that separated the living from the dead. Every rustle of grass was a potential ending. Every snap of a twig was a call to attention that froze the blood. The hominid ear, tuned to the frequencies of the human voice, was also tuned to the subtle acoustics of predation. The soft puff of dust disturbed by a paw, the intake of breath before a charge. Consider the auditory landscape of the animal kingdom. For millions of years, the primary way to signal distress, pain, or need was through sound. The yelp of a wounded dog, the high-pitched bleat of a separated calf, the shriek of a primate falling from a tree. These were the universal alarms of nature. They were loud, guttural, and unmistakable. They were designed by evolution to cut through the ambient noise of wind and water, to travel long distances to reach the ears of a mother or a pack. They were frantic, chaotic explosions of acoustic energy. But for a creature beginning to rely on complex cooperation, for a creature whose survival depended on stealth and the element of surprise, sound was a double-edged sword. To scream in pain or frustration on the open savannah was to ring a dinner bell for the monsters that stalked the periphery of the camp. The leopard, draped invisibly on the limb of a sausage tree, listened for the vocalizations of the weak. The hyena, loping tirelessly through the scrub, triangulated the coordinates of suffering. A crying baby, a moaning hunter, a grieving mother, these were beacons of vulnerability. They announced to the predatory guild that an easy meal was available, that defenses were down, that the tribe was distracted. And so, a great pressure began to exert itself upon the genome of our ancestors. It was a pressure as tangible as the heat of the sun or the bite of the wind. Evolution, in its slow and mysterious wisdom, began to favor those who could endure suffering in silence. It favored the child who could signal hunger without a shriek, the hunter who could signal injury without a groan. The body needed a new language, a signal that could be shouted across a small distance, from face to face, from eyes to eyes, but remain unheard by the killers in the dark. The stage was being set for a quiet revolution, a shift from the auditory to the visual, a shift from the broadcast to the narrowcast. The face was becoming a canvas, and the stage was being prepared for a single drop of water to speak louder than a scream. Imagine, if you can, a day in the life of this ancient silence. It is mid-morning, and the heat is already rising in shimmering waves from the laterite soil. A small band of hunters, perhaps Homo ergaster, moves through the sea of grass. They are dark-skinned, hairless, sweating, their bodies efficient cooling machines designed for endurance. They carry simple wooden spears, the tips hardened in fire, and hand axes chipped from obsidian and flint. They do not speak, not in the way we understand language today. Their communication is a dance of subtle gestures, strict formations, and meaningful glances. They are tracking a wounded kudu. The animal is ahead, bleeding, tiring, but still dangerous. The hunters must remain invisible, and more importantly, inaudible. The wind is in their faces, carrying the scent of the prey, but also carrying their own sounds away. They step with a practiced rolling gait, placing the heel down first, then rolling to the toe, feeling for twigs or dry leaves before committing their weight. It is a walking meditation, a trance of absolute focus. Suddenly, one of the hunters, a young male, steps into a hidden depression in the earth. His ankle turns with a sickening crunch of cartilage. The pain is immediate, electric, and overwhelming. It shoots up his leg, a white-hot spike of agony that demands a reaction. The ancient reptilian part of his brain, the brainstem, the seat of instinct, screams at him to vocalize. It commands him to roar, to yelp, to announce his injury to the world. It is the same instinct that makes the wolf howl when caught in a trap, but he does not make a sound. His jaw clamps shut, the masseter muscles bulging under the skin of his cheek. His lips press together until they are white. He sucks the air in through his nose, a sharp, hissing intake, but he does not vocalize. He knows, with a knowledge deeper than thought, that to scream now is to doom the hunt. To scream is to alert the kudu, sending it fleeing into the bush. To scream is to reveal their position to the lions resting in the shade of the kopje a mile away. To scream is to endanger his brothers. Instead, the energy of that scream is redirected. The neural impulse, blocked from the vocal cords, floods the other pathways of the face. His eyes squeeze shut for a moment, the orbicularis oculi muscles contracting in a spasm of control. When they open, they are swimming. The lacrimal glands, triggered by the intense stress and the suppression of the vocal impulse, have released their saline burden. He looks at the leader of the group. He points to his ankle, then touches his face. The leader sees the glistening track of moisture on the dark skin. He sees the pain written in the tension of the brow and the wetness of the eyes. No word is spoken. The silence of the savannah remains unbroken. The birds do not take flight. The gazelles do not lift their heads. But the message has been received, loud and clear. I am hurt. I cannot continue. I am in pain. The leader signals for another to help him. They support his weight, moving him to the safety of a thorn bush. The hunt continues. The tribe survives. The silence held. This moment, repeated millions of times over millions of years, carved the path for the emotional tear. It was born of necessity. It was born of the need to decouple the experience of pain from the vocal expression of pain. We became the animals that could suffer quietly. We became the creatures who could communicate the most profound internal states, agony, grief, terror, joy, without breaking the acoustic camouflage that kept us safe. We must also consider the layout of the face itself, which was undergoing a dramatic architectural renovation during this time. As we lost the heavy fur of our primate cousins, the face became naked. The skin around the eyes, the forehead, the mouth, all of it was exposed. This was not an accident. It was a billboard. Evolution was investing heavily in the face as a transmitter of information. The muscles beneath the skin became more complex, capable of micro-movements that could convey nuance. But the most striking change was in the eye itself. In most animals, the eye is dominated by the iris and the pupil. The white of the eye, the sclera, is hidden or dark. This obscures the direction of the gaze, preventing predators from knowing where the animal is looking. But in humans, the sclera became bright white, contrasting sharply with the dark iris and the skin. Why? To allow for gaze tracking, to allow one human to see exactly where another was looking. And against this backdrop of the white eye and the naked face, the tear became a high-contrast signal. Imagine the firelight flickering in a cave at night. The darkness is absolute. A face is barely visible. But a wet, shining trail of tears reflects the light. It glimmers. It catches the eye of the observer across the fire. It is a visual shout. This shift from sound to sight was particularly crucial for the most vulnerable members of the tribe. The infants. Human infants are born in a state of supreme helplessness, far earlier in their development than other mammals, due to the size of our rapidly growing brains. A foal can run within hours. A human baby cannot lift its head for months. This period of dependency, this fourth trimester, placed an enormous burden on the parents. The infant needs to signal hunger, cold, and separation. But a crying baby in the Pleistocene night is a beacon of death. We can imagine the terrified mother, huddled in the darkness, the sounds of the hyenas whooping in the distance. Her baby begins to fuss. The mother's instinct is to hush the child, to press it to her breast, to smother the sound. Evolution began to select for infants who could employ a graded signal system. First, the fussing face, the grimace, the squirming, then the tears, the silent flow of distress. If the mother notices these visual cues, she can attend to the need before the auditory siren goes off. The baby that cries visually before it cries vocally is the baby that does not attract the leopard. The tear, in this context, is a buffer zone. It is a pre-alarm. It is a way of saying, "I need you," without shouting it to the enemies in the dark. And so, the brain began to rewire itself. The connections between the limbic system, the seat of emotion, and the lacrimal nuclei became strengthened. The nerves that controlled the vocal cords developed inhibitory pathways that could be activated by high stress, while the nerves to the tear ducts became excitatory. We were learning to choke back our words and pour out our feelings. This silent vigil changed the very nature of our social bonds. Because the visual signal of the tear requires proximity to be seen, it forced us to be close. You cannot see a tear from 100 yards away. You must be within arm's reach. You must be in the intimate zone. Thus, the tear fostered closeness. It demanded that we look into each other's faces. It demanded that we pay attention to the subtle weather of each other's emotions. As the millennia passed, this silence became a sacred space. It was in the silence of the hunt, the silence of the vigil over the sick, the silence of the morning ritual, that the human spirit began to deepen. We learned to read the unspoken. We learned that the truest things are often those that cannot be said, only shown. The transition was not sudden. It did not happen in a single generation. It was a slow drift, like the movement of glaciers. There were times when the scream was still necessary, times when the roar of aggression or the shriek of warning saved the tribe. We did not lose our voice. We simply added a new layer of sophistication to our repertoire. We became the masters of the dual signal, the voice for the distance, the tear for the intimate. But deep within the marrow of our history, the fear of the predator remains. Even today, in the safety of our modern homes, we often weep in silence. When we are truly devastated, when the grief is too heavy to bear, we often retreat to a quiet room. We cover our faces with our hands. We sob into a pillow to stifle the sound. Why? Because the ancient memory is still there. The leopard is still listening. The hyena is still circling. The instinct to hide our vulnerability, to keep our suffering silent, is carved into the architecture of our nervous system. We are the descendants of the silent hunters. We are the children of the ones who learned to cry without making a sound. We carry the legacy of the savannah in the very way we express our pain. And as the night deepens around you now, as the shadows lengthen in your own room, remember that this silence is a gift. It is a survival strategy that became a language of love. The quiet that surrounds you is not empty. It is filled with the protective history of your ancestors. They stood guard in the tall grass, watching, waiting, holding their breath, so that you could be here tonight. They endured the heat, the thirst, and the terror, mastering the art of the silent signal, passing it down through the bloodlines until it reached you. So when you feel the prick of tears, know that you are using an ancient weapon. You are using a tool that defeated the darkness. You are speaking the language of the survivors. Let the vigilance fade now. The hunt is over. The predators have turned to stone and dust. The fire is lit, and the tribe is gathered. You can rest. You can close your eyes, knowing that the silent sentinels of your past are watching over you, and that the only sound you need to hear is the steady, calming rhythm of your own breath, rising and falling like the grasses of that distant golden plain. The vigil is done. Sleep now, in the safety of the silence. Let us descend now, deeper into the velvet folds of deep time, leaving the sun-drenched plains of the hunter for the intimate shadowed corners of the cave. Picture, if you will, a night some 300,000 years ago, during the middle epoch of the Pleistocene. The world outside is a symphony of hostility. The wind howls across the tundra or whips through the acacia thorns, carrying the scent of ice or dry dust. The darkness is absolute, save for the cold, indifferent stare of the stars and the erratic, warm heartbeat of a small fire flickering at the mouth of a shelter. Here, in the fragile circle of light, a drama is unfolding that will dictate the future of our species. It is not a drama of spears and blood, but of soft skin, milk, and silence. To understand the origin of the emotional tear, that singular bead of salt water that defines our humanity, we must look away from the warrior and the gatherer and gaze upon the most helpless creature to ever walk, or rather, to ever fail to walk, upon the face of the earth, the human infant. In the grand, brutal calculus of nature, the human baby is an anomaly. It is a biological paradox. Look to the animal kingdom, to the peers with whom we shared the ancient landscapes. Consider the wildebeest on the savannah. Within minutes of tumbling from the womb, wet and shivering, the calf struggles to its feet. Its legs, though spindly, are wired with the immediate competence of flight. It must run. It must keep pace with the herd within the hour, or it will die. The foal, the fawn, the lamb. They are born complete, their senses sharp, their motor cortices firing with pre-programmed agility. They hit the ground running, fully equipped for the rigors of existence. But the human child? The human child is a creature of absolute, terrifying dependence. It is born into a state of profound prematurity, a larval stage of humanity that requires years of intensive care merely to survive the elements. When our ancestors peer down at a newborn in the flickering firelight, they do not see a creature ready for the world. They see a being that cannot lift its own head. They see eyes that cannot yet focus on the horizon. They see a body that cannot regulate its own temperature, a digestive system that requires a specific processed sustenance, and a nervous system that is a chaotic storm of unpruned potential. Why did nature, the great optimizer, allow such vulnerability? Why would evolution, which ruthlessly culls the weak, select for a strictly helpless infant? The answer lies in the very thing that makes us human, the brain. As the eons passed and the lineage of Homo began to rise, a silent war was waged within the anatomy of our mothers. It was a war between two opposing evolutionary imperatives. On one side was the need for bipedalism, the upright stance that freed our hands to make tools and carry fire. To walk upright efficiently, the pelvis had to narrow, the hips becoming more compact to support the vertical weight of the torso. But on the other side was the explosive growth of the brain. We were becoming the thinking ape, the problem solver, the dreamer. Our skulls were expanding, ballooning outward to house the neocortex, the seat of language and logic. Here lay the obstetric dilemma, a bottleneck of biology. A large-brained fetus could not pass through the narrow, efficient hips of a bipedal mother. If the baby waited until it was physically mature, like the foal, its head would be too large to be born. The mother and child would both perish. And so, evolution struck a dangerous compromise. It demanded that human infants be evicted from the womb early. We are born, in essence, halfway through our gestation. We are born before our skulls are fused, before our brains are fully wired, before our bodies are ready. We enter the world in a state of secondary altriciality, requiring a fourth trimester outside the womb to reach the level of development that other primates achieve inside it. This early exit saved the mother and allowed for the big brain, but it came at a staggering cost. It created the burden of helplessness. Imagine the weight of this burden on a mother in the Stone Age. She is not merely a parent, she is a survival unit in a hostile environment. She must forage for tubers. She must remain vigilant for predators. She must keep the fire fed. And yet, she carries a burden that cannot cling to her fur, for we have lost our fur. She carries a burden that cannot walk, cannot feed itself, and cannot regulate its own heat. She must carry the infant in her arms, or in a sling of woven reed and leather, pressing the child's skin against hers to share the warmth of her blood. The bond is intense, chemical, and constant, but it is also fraught with peril. The infant has needs: hunger, cold, pain, the terror of separation, and it must communicate those needs with urgency. In the daylight, amidst the chatter of the tribe and the safety of numbers, a cry is manageable. But the Paleolithic world was ruled by the night, and in the night, sound was death. Let us construct the scene. The sun has dipped below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and black. The temperature plummets. The tribe huddles in a shallow cave or a temporary encampment of branches. Beyond the circle of the fire's glow, the eyes of the Pleistocene predators catch the light, green and yellow orbs floating in the abyss. The giant hyena, Pachecracuta, with jaws strong enough to snap the femur of an elephant, prowls the perimeter. The saber-toothed cat, moving with the silence of smoke, sniffs the air. These monsters hunt by sound as much as by scent. They listen for the rustle of fear. They listen for the distress of the vulnerable. Now imagine the infant awaking in the dark. Perhaps the cold air has bitten its skin. Perhaps the hunger pangs have twisted its small stomach. The primitive instinct of the brainstem commands a signal. The lungs fill with air. The vocal cords tighten. The baby prepares to shriek, a sound designed to pierce the air, to shatter complacency, to summon help. But this shriek is a beacon. It is a siren that announces to every predator within a mile, here is the weak one. Here is the defenseless one. Here is the meal. A crying baby in the night was a terrifying liability for the entire group. We can feel the tension in the cave. The hunters shifting uneasily, gripping their spears, their eyes darting to the darkness. We can feel the frantic heartbeat of the mother as she rushes to silence the child, offering the breast, rocking, hushing, her own fear spiking as the cry echoes off the stone walls. The evolutionary logic is brutal, cold, and elegant. Those infants who cried too loudly, too often, or for too long, attracted the darkness. They, and sometimes their entire families, were culled from the gene pool. But the need to signal could not be erased. The baby must communicate. If it stays silent and hungry, it weakens and dies. If it stays silent and cold, hypothermia sets in. There had to be a middle way. There had to be a negotiation between the desperate need for care and the desperate need for silence. And so, the tear began its great migration. It began to drift from the realm of pure physiology, the washing of dust, to the realm of psychology. Consider the mechanics of the cry. When an infant screams, it squeezes its eyes shut. This is a protective reflex, tensing the muscles around the eyes to protect the delicate globes from the immense pressure building in the blood vessels of the face during a scream. This squeezing action puts pressure on the lacrimal glands. It forces the fluid out. In the early days, this was likely just a side effect, a wet byproduct of the exertion of screaming. But nature is a scavenger of function. Over thousands of generations, a subtle association began to form in the minds of the caregivers. The parents noticed that the most intense distress, the kind that required immediate attention, was accompanied by these glistening beads of water. The visual signal began to take on meaning. Slowly, the volume knob was turned down, and the visual signal was turned up. A mutation, a whisper in the code, allowed for the production of tears before the full-throated scream, or even in place of it. Imagine the advantage of the quiet crier. The infant wakes in the dark. It feels the distress. But instead of immediately launching into a rhythmic wail, the limbic system activates the lacrimal response first. The eyes fill. The tears spill over the lids, catching the faint amber glow of the dying embers. The mother, sleeping lightly, tuned by hormones to the slightest movement of her child, wakes. She looks down. She does not hear a scream that alerts the hyena. She sees the shimmer of wetness on the cheek. She sees the glassiness of the eye. The message is delivered instantly and silently. I need you. She reaches out. She pulls the child close. The hunger is fed. The cold is banished. The silence of the camp remains unbroken. The predator stalks past, hearing nothing but the wind. This infant survives. This infant passes on the genes for the weep. This was the beginning of a biological negotiation between the parent and the child. It was a treaty signed in salt water. The tear became a silent plea written on the face, demanding an answer of tenderness rather than aggression. And we must consider the reaction of the observer. This is crucial. Why does a tear elicit care? Why doesn't it elicit disgust or indifference? Deep within the brain of the adult, a corresponding evolution was taking place. The sight of tears on the face of an infant began to trigger specific neural pathways in the parents. We know today that the sight of crying lowers testosterone in men and raises oxytocin in women. It is a chemical key that unlocks the door of compassion. When a baby screams, it can trigger annoyance. It can trigger a fight-or-flight response in an exhausted parent. It is grating. It is an assault on the ears. But when a baby cries silently with tears streaming down its face, it triggers something else entirely. It triggers the alloparenting instinct, the desire to hold, to soothe, to protect. This was vital for the human species because the burden of the fourth trimester was too great for the mother to bear alone. A human child consumes some 13 million calories to reach adulthood. No single woman could provide this in the scarcity of the Pleistocene. She needed help. She needed the father, the grandmother, the aunts, the siblings. She needed the tribe. The tear became the tool that recruited the tribe. Imagine a grandmother sitting by the fire scraping a hide. She sees her daughter's infant, sitting in the dust, lip trembling, eyes filling with water. The mother is away, perhaps foraging. The grandmother is not lactating. She is not hormonally primed by birth. But the sight of those tears bypasses the logic of relation. It hits the ancient mammalian core of her brain. The Kinchin schema, the cute response, is activated, amplified by the distress signal of the tear. She drops the hide. She picks up the child. She soothes it. The tear, therefore, was not just a signal of distress. It was a mechanism of social binding. It allowed the helpless infant to manipulate the behavior of the adults around it, turning potential aggression or indifference into solicitude. It was a survival weapon for the physically unarmed. As the epoch of the caves gave way to the epoch of the huts, this trait became deeply entrenched. The connection between the feeling of helplessness and the flow of tears became absolute. The wiring error that connected the emotional center to the tear duct became the standard blueprint for the human machine. But let us pause and reflect on the profound strangeness of this. We are the only animal that weeps emotional tears. Other animals whine, they howl, they keen. Elephants mourn, chimps sulk, dogs whimper. But they do not produce a flow of tears in response to sadness. Their eyes remain dry in their grief. Why only us? Perhaps it is because no other animal is as helpless for as long as we are. The tear is the scar of our fragility. It is the permanent memory of those long, dark nights where we lay unable to move, unable to fight, possessing only the power to signal our need to another. It is the physical manifestation of our interdependence. We survived not because we were strong like the tiger, nor because we were armored like the rhino. We survived because we were soft. We survived because we developed a way to make our softness a demand for love. The tear allowed the weak to command the strong. It allowed the infant to turn the fierce hunter into a gentle nurse. And so, the burden of helplessness became the forge of our humanity. It forced us to connect. It forced us to look into each other's faces in the dark. It forced us to develop a language of empathy that required no words, only the shimmer of light on water. Generations faded into dust. The climate warmed and cooled. The great herds migrated and vanished. But the trait remained. It rode the genetic arc of our species through the bottleneck of the Toba supervolcano, through the expansion out of Africa, through the freezing bridges of Beringia. Every time you see a newborn today, scrunching its face, its eyes welling up with that clear, pure fluid, you are witnessing a reenactment of a prehistoric drama. You are seeing the echo of the fourth trimester. You are seeing the ghost of the predator that forced us to be quiet. You are seeing the ancient strategy of the helpless, reaching out across the void of isolation to say, I am here, I am small, do not let me go. The tear is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of a survival strategy so potent that it conquered the world. It turned our vulnerability into our greatest strength, our capacity to care for one another. And as the child grows, as the bones harden and the muscles knit, the tear does not disappear. It remains. It waits in the wings, ready to emerge whenever that ancient feeling of helplessness returns. For even as adults, we are often small in the face of the universe. We are often overwhelmed by the cold and the dark. And when we are, the body remembers. The old pathways fire, the water rises, and we become once again the infant in the cave, signaling silently to the tribe that we need to be held. The fire may have turned to electric light, and the cave to a city of glass, but the biology is unchanged. We are the children of the long childhood, the inheritors of the heavy brain, and the keepers of the tear, that liquid bridge between the solitude of the self and the comfort of the other. Sleep now, knowing that this fragility is not a flaw. It is the very reason you are here. It is the reason we are not alone in the dark. We must now leave the tangible world of the savannah wind and the cave fire and turn our gaze inward. We travel into a landscape far more complex and mysterious than the Great Rift Valley or the frozen tundras of the north. We enter the silent, pulsating cathedral of the human brain. It is here, in the dark, wet quiet of the cranium, that the true revolution took place. For while our bones were lengthening and our hands were learning the art of the stone tool, a subtle, invisible architecture was being rewritten within the deepest folds of our gray matter. It was a change so microscopic that it left no fossil record, no mark on the skull, no trace in the dust. Yet it was this change that would forever separate us from the wolf, the ape, and the lion. Picture, if you will, the biological machinery of an ancient ancestor, perhaps Homo heidelbergensis, living some 500,000 years ago. He stands by a riverbank, the water reflecting a sky heavy with storm clouds. His body is a marvel of adaptation. His heart pumps blood with rhythmic precision. His lungs exchange oxygen with the efficiency of an engine. His eyes, guarded by the basal tear, are clear. But inside his skull, the wiring is strictly utilitarian. His lacrimal glands, those small almond-shaped factories nestled in the bone above the outer corners of his eyes, are simple servants of the physical world. They listen only to the reflex nerves. Dust blows, they weep. Smoke stings, they weep. An onion is crushed, they weep. They are janitors of the cornea, nothing more. But deep within the architecture of the developing human brain, a silent error was occurring in the code of life. It was a mistake, perhaps, or a masterpiece of mutation occurring in the darkness of the womb during the delicate assembly of the nervous system. A neural pathway, thin as a spider's web, began to stray. It reached out from the lacrimal nucleus, the command center for tears, and began to forge a connection where none had existed before. It did not connect to the sensory nerves of the eye surface. Instead, it reached deeper, diving into the ancient fiery seat of the mind, the limbic system. The limbic system is the old brain, the mammalian brain. It is the throne of our deepest passions, our fears, our aggressions, and our desires. It is where the memory of the predator lives. It is where the warmth of the mother is encoded. At the center of this system sits the hypothalamus, a tiny almond-sized cluster of neurons that acts as the conductor of our internal orchestra. The hypothalamus controls the storms of the body, the racing heart of terror, the sweat of anxiety, the heat of rage. For millions of years, this conductor had many instruments at its disposal: the adrenal glands, the heart, the lungs. But it had never controlled the eyes. Until now. Slowly, over thousands of generations, through a process of selection that favored the communicative and the connected, this stray neural pathway strengthened. It thickened. It became a superhighway. The hypothalamus gained a new power, the ability to command the rein. This was a profound biological leap. It was the moment biology married psychology. It was the moment the physical body became a canvas for the invisible mind. Consider the sheer improbability of this connection. There is no logical reason why a feeling of sadness, an abstract emotional state regarding loss or failure, should trigger the excretion of salt water from the eye. There is no obvious survival advantage in blurring one's vision when one is already distressed, and yet the connection was forged. The ghost in the machine found a way to manifest itself. Let us imagine a specific moment in deep time where this new wiring is put to the test. It is the height of the dry season. The landscape is a mosaic of parched earth and yellow grass. A small group of early humans is gathered around a shallow watering hole. Among them is a young female. She has recently lost a child, perhaps to fever, perhaps to the leopard. In a species without this new wiring, her grief would be internal. She might sit lethargically. She might lose her appetite. Her cortisol levels would rise, her immune system would weaken, but her face would remain dry. Her eyes would look out at the world with the same clear, glassy stare as the rest of the tribe. Her suffering would be a locked room, invisible to those around her. But this female carries the mutation. She carries the new pathway. As the memory of her child washes over her, a memory stored in the hippocampus, triggered perhaps by the smell of soft skin or the sight of a small footprint in the mud, her limbic system flares. The anterior cingulate cortex, the part of the brain that processes social pain and separation, lights up with electrical fire. This signal travels down to the hypothalamus. The conductor waves its baton. Acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter of movement and reaction, is released at the synaptic terminals. Usually, acetylcholine tells a muscle to contract or a heart to slow down. But here, it finds a new target, the lacrimal gland. The chemical key turns the lock. The gland, obeying a command it has never received before, begins to pump. It draws water, salt, proteins, and hormones from the blood. It swells, and then it releases. The fluid spills over the eyelid. It tracks through the dust on her cheek. It drips from her chin. This is the birth of the psychogenic tear. It is a tear born not of dust, but of a feeling. It is the physical manifestation of an internal storm. For the first time in the history of life on Earth, a creature is crying because it feels. The implications of this rewiring are staggering. It meant that the internal weather of the human being could no longer be contained. Before this, an animal could hide its state. A wolf can be in pain and show no sign until it is too late. A cat can be terrified and remain frozen. But the human face became a leakage point for the soul. We became transparent. The walls between the inner self and the outer world began to dissolve. This transparency came with a chemical complexity that borders on the poetic. When the hypothalamus triggers this emotional weeping, it does not just send water. It alters the very recipe of the tear. If we were to capture that tear falling from the cheek of the grieving mother and place it under the microscope of a future scientist, we would find it teeming with different molecules than the basal tear. We would find prolactin, a hormone associated with milk production and bonding. We would find adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, a marker of high stress. We would find leucine and enkephalin, a natural opioid, a painkiller produced by the body to soothe itself. Think of what this means. It means that the act of crying is, chemically, an act of purging. The brain, overwhelmed by the stress of grief or trauma, physically expels the chemicals of that stress through the eyes. It is a biological pressure valve. The river in the limbic mind is a drainage system for the soul. When we say we need a good cry to feel better, we are speaking a physiological truth. We are literally washing the stress hormones out of our system, resetting the chemical balance of the brain, allowing the storm to pass so that clarity can return. But the journey of this adaptation was not without its perils. We must remember the evolutionary duality, the constant tension between adaptation and cost. This rewiring made us vulnerable. It made us unable to hide. Imagine a tribal dispute in the flickering light of the hearth. Two males are posturing, vying for status or a mate. In the old world, the primate world, the one who could mask his fear, who could present a stoic, unreadable mask, would often win. But now, with this new connection, the body betrays the mind. The rush of adrenaline, the spike of fear, triggers the lacrimal response. Tears well up in the eyes of one of the combatants, not from sadness, but from the sheer intensity of the emotion, the frustration, the rage. He blinks. The tear falls. In that moment, he is unmasked. His vulnerability is broadcast to the entire group. He loses status. He is seen as weak. This is the cost of the open channel. We became a species that leaks its secrets. We became a species that blushes, that sweats with nervousness, and that weeps when we try to be strong. We traded the safety of the poker face for the power of authentic connection. And yet, this cost was outweighed by a massive benefit, the birth of empathy. The rewiring of the brain did not just happen in the crier, it happened in the observer. As the tear became a signal of emotional state, the human brain developed a specific sensitivity to it. We possess mirror neurons, cells that fire not only when we perform an action, but when we see someone else perform it. When we see someone crying, the areas of our own brain associated with sadness and pain light up in sympathy. We literally feel their tears. This created a feedback loop that accelerated our social evolution. The tear became the catalyst for a new kind of society, one based not just on dominance, but on care. If the hypothalamus could command the rain, then the rain could command the tribe. The sight of a weeping individual triggered a rush of oxytocin in the observers, the love hormone that fosters bonding and trust. The tear was the signal that turned a group of individuals into a family. Let us return to the day in the life of our ancestors to see this in action. The Ice Age has descended. The world is a place of blue shadows and biting winds. A hunting party returns to the camp, empty-handed and exhausted. They have failed. The hunger in the camp is palpable. One of the hunters, a young man who feels the weight of this failure keenly, sits by the fire. He is overwhelmed by a sense of inadequacy, a fear for the survival of his kin. The stress mounts. The hypothalamus fires. He weeps. In a wolf pack, a weak or despondent member might be marginalized or bullied. But here, something else happens. An older member of the tribe sees the tears. He recognizes the signal. He does not see a competitor. He sees a brother in pain. He moves closer. He places a hand on the young man's shoulder. He offers a share of the reserved food. The tear has elicited support. It has strengthened the bond between the men. It has ensured that the group remains cohesive rather than fracturing under the stress of the famine. The river in the limbic mind has watered the roots of their society. This connection between the eye and the brain also helps to explain the mystery of tears of joy. Why, when we are overwhelmed with happiness, the birth of a child, the return of a loved one, a moment of transcendent beauty, do we weep? Why would the body use the signal of pain for the experience of pleasure? The answer lies in the crudeness of the limbic system's wiring. The hypothalamus, ancient and powerful, is not always precise. It registers intensity of emotion more than the flavor of emotion. When we are struck by a moment of profound joy, the nervous system is flooded with arousal. The heart races, the breath quickens, the skin tingles. The system is overloaded. The hypothalamus, sensing this massive spike in neural traffic, hits the panic button, or rather, the release valve. It triggers the tears to bring the system back to homeostasis, to calm the body down. So, when the Paleolithic wanderer stood on a high ridge and looked out over a valley teeming with game, the sun breaking through the clouds in shafts of divine light, and felt a surge of awe so powerful it brought him to his knees, he wept. He wept not because he was sad, but because he was full. His cup ran over. The tears were the body's way of saying, "This is too much. I must release this energy." It was the beginning of the human capacity for the sublime, the ability to be moved by beauty to the point of physical reaction. As we moved through the Neolithic Revolution, as we built walls and planted crops, this internal river continued to flow. It became woven into our culture, our myths, and our rituals. But the biological machinery remained the same. It is the same machinery you possess today. Consider the complexity of the signal you send when you cry. You are engaging a system that involves the cranial nerves, specifically the seventh, the facial nerve, the parasympathetic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, the endocrine system, and the neocortex. It is a symphony of interaction. The sensory input, bad news, a sad song, a physical pain, enters the brain. The cortex analyzes it. This is sad. The signal is sent to the limbic system. Feel this. The amygdala adds the emotional weight. This hurts. The hypothalamus takes control. Release. Acetylcholine floods the receptors. The lacrimal glands contract. The breath hitches. The diaphragm spasming in connection with the stress response. The throat tightens. The glottis expanding to take in air. And the water flows. All of this happens in a split second, a cascade of ancient biological dominoes falling in perfect sequence. It is a miracle of engineering, and it is entirely involuntary. We can try to suppress it. We can bite our lips, look at the ceiling, hold our breath, but the river is powerful. The limbic mind is older and stronger than the rational mind. It demands to be heard. This river in the limbic mind also tells us something profound about the environment in which we evolved. We evolved in a world where it was safe enough to cry, at least within the circle of the tribe. If crying had been purely a death sentence, the mutation would have been weeded out. The fact that it persisted, that it flourished, means that the benefits of social connection outweighed the risks of predation. It means that love was a stronger evolutionary force than fear. We are the descendants of those who could cry and be comforted. We are the children of the transparent. As you lie there now, drifting towards sleep, think of the pathways in your own brain. Think of that thin, silver thread of nerves that connects your deepest feelings to your eyes. It is a bridge between the intangible world of your thoughts and the tangible world of your body. It is a testament to the fact that you are not a machine, but a vessel of deep, ancient waters. Every time you have cried, you have reenacted this ancient rewiring. You have let the river flow. You have allowed the internal storm to break, bringing the calm that follows the rain. The silence of the genome whispers in these moments. It tells you that to feel is human, to weep is to heal, and that the river that flows through your mind is the same river that has sustained our species through the long, dark drought of history. The mind is a vast country, full of dry plains and high mountains, but it is the river of tears, that makes it habitable. It is the river that allows life to bloom in the desert of survival. And as the night closes in, that river flows on, quiet, dark, and deep, carrying the memories of 1,000 generations who learned, slowly and painfully, to turn their suffering into water, and their water into love. And so, the brain was rewired, the stage was set, the instrument was tuned. But the story does not end with the individual. For a tear to have meaning, it must be seen. It must be interpreted. The evolution of the tear required a corresponding evolution in the eye of the beholder. We had created the signal. Now we needed to learn how to read it. The next chapter of our history would be written not in the isolation of the skull, but in the space between faces, the sacred, silent space where sight becomes surrender. The wind shifts now, carrying us away from the internal rivers of the limbic mind and back out into the stark, physical reality of the prehistoric world. We find ourselves standing on the edge of a precipice, not of rock, but of behavior. It is the Middle Pleistocene, a time when the human animal was becoming something more dangerous, more organized, and more lethal than any predator that had come before. The hand axe had been refined into a tool of deadly symmetry. The wooden spear had been hardened in the fire to pierce the thickest hide. We had become the masters of the strike. But in a world ruled by the capacity for violence, a strange and counterintuitive paradox began to emerge, a biological mystery that haunts the logic of survival to this day. There is a theory, often whispered by evolutionary biologists in the quiet, dust-mote-filled halls of academia, known as the handicap principle. It is a concept that challenges the very bedrock of Darwinian ruthlessness. It asks a simple, troubling question. In a world where every advantage counts, where the fastest runner escapes the lion and the strongest arm claims the mate, why would an organism evolve a trait that deliberately weakens it? Why would the peacock grow a tail so heavy it can barely fly? And why, in the brutal calculus of the Stone Age, would the human animal evolve a mechanism that effectively blinds it in moments of crisis? Consider the physiology of the cry. It is not merely a release of fluid, it is a dismantling of the primary sense. When the lacrimal glands obey the command of the hypothalamus, they flood the eyes with a volume of water that the drainage ducts cannot immediately handle. The tear film, usually a microscopic layer of perfect optical clarity, thickens. It pools. It spills over the eyelid and clings to the lashes. The result is immediate and profound. The world, once sharp and defined, dissolves. The horizon, where the threats lurk, becomes a distorted, impressionistic blur. The face of the enemy becomes a wash of color without definition. Depth perception collapses. Peripheral vision is compromised. In this state, you cannot focus on the distant movement of a predator. You cannot aim a projectile with any accuracy. You cannot effectively parry a blow. You are, for all intents and purposes, visually incapacitated. To voluntarily blind oneself, even for a moment, in the presence of a threat, is an act of supreme surrender. It is a biological disarmament. It goes against every instinct of the fight-or-flight response, which screams for hypervigilance, for dilated pupils, for absolute clarity. And yet, this surrender of sight was not a mistake. It was a strategy. It was a stroke of evolutionary genius that turned vulnerability into the ultimate defense. Let us transport ourselves to a specific moment in the deep past to witness the birth of this mechanism. The setting is a rocky outcrop in the Ethiopian highlands, 150,000 years ago. The air is thin and cold, smelling of ozone and wet stone. A small tribe of early Homo sapiens is gathered. Tensions are high. The hierarchy of the group is in flux. A dangerous time when alliances shift and violence simmers just beneath the surface. Two males stand in the center of the clearing. One is older, dominant, his body scarred from years of leadership and conflict. The other is younger, a challenger who has overstepped his bounds. The confrontation has escalated beyond posturing. Stones have been gripped. Shouts, guttural, sharp barks of aggression have echoed off the canyon walls. The older male steps forward, raising a heavy piece of flint. His intent is clear. He intends to strike, perhaps to kill, to reassert his dominance with finality. The younger male is cornered. He knows he cannot win. The physical fight is lost before it has begun. In the animal kingdom, this moment often ends in blood. The wolf bares its throat. The dog rolls on its back. But the human animal has a more complex signal. Fear, overwhelming and electric, floods the young male's system. But mixed with this fear is a profound sense of helplessness, a realization of the end. The limbic system fires. The river in the mind bursts its banks. His eyes fill with tears. Suddenly his vision swims. The looming figure of the aggressor becomes a watery shadow. He blinks, and the tears spill down his cheeks, catching the harsh light of the high-altitude sun. He lowers his head, not just to protect his neck, but because he can no longer see to fight. He drops the stone from his hand. His posture collapses. He is blind, weeping, and utterly exposed. And then, a miracle of psychology occurs. The older male freezes. The arm holding the weapon wavers. The sight of the tears, the visible manifestation of the handicap, triggers a deep, ancient inhibition in his brain. The aggression, fueled by adrenaline and the drive to conquer a threat, suddenly hits a wall. The enemy is no longer a threat. The enemy has dismantled his own defenses. The enemy has surrendered his sight. To strike a blind man is a violation of a deep, unwritten code of social conduct that was beginning to form in the growing human consciousness. It feels wrong. It feels unnecessary. The biological imperative to destroy a rival is replaced by a confusing, softer impulse: pity. The tension drains from the older male's shoulders. He lowers the stone. He grunts, a sound of dismissal rather than rage, and turns away. The tear has done what the spear could not. It has stopped the violence. It has saved the life of the weaker male without a drop of blood being spilled. This blurring of sight served a powerful social function. It was a flag of truce, woven from water and salt. By crying, an individual demonstrated to their tribe that they had opted out of the conflict. It signaled submission, helplessness, and a complete lack of aggressive intent. You cannot attack what you cannot see. By blinding himself, the crier was saying to the aggressor, "I am vulnerable. I cannot see to fight you. I surrender." This lowering of defenses triggered a primal inhibition in others, halting violence and inviting mercy. The tear was a shield made of water, protecting the weak by displaying their fragility in the most undeniable way possible. We must understand that this mechanism evolved in a species that was becoming increasingly lethal to itself. As our weapons grew more efficient, the cost of intraspecies conflict became too high. If every dispute ended in death, the tribe would dwindle. We needed brakes on our aggression. We needed off switches for our rage. The tear became that switch. Imagine the evolutionary pressure cooker of the Pleistocene caves. We lived in tight, claustrophobic groups. We slept shoulder to shoulder. We ate from the same kill. In such proximity, friction is inevitable. Jealousy over mates, disputes over food, the irritability of hunger and cold, all of these were sparks in a room full of dry tinder. Without a way to de-escalate, to show submission without being destroyed, our social structures would have imploded. The surrender of sight allowed for the existence of hierarchy without constant massacre. It allowed the losing party to remain in the group. The young male in our story lives. He stays with the tribe. He hunts another day. He passes on his genes. Genes that include the capacity to weep when cornered. But this surrender goes deeper than just conflict resolution. It speaks to the very nature of trust. To blur your vision in the presence of another is the ultimate compliment. It says, "I trust you not to kill me when I cannot see you." Consider the bond between lovers or between deep friends. There is a moment of intimacy where tears flow, not from pain, but from the sheer intensity of connection. In these moments, we let our guard down completely. We let our vision blur. We allow the other person to see us in a state of total defenselessness. And in doing so, we forge a bond that is stronger than iron. We are saying, "I am safe with you. I do not need to watch the horizon when I am with you." Let us drift forward in time, to the thawing world of the Neolithic. The ice sheets are retreating, leaving behind scarred valleys and new rivers. Humans are settling. We are building the first permanent structures, the first walls. But the walls of the ego remain the hardest to breach. In this new world of agriculture and ownership, the stakes of conflict changed. It was no longer just about dominance. It was about property, about lineage. The potential for organized violence, for war, was growing. And yet, the tear remained the universal solvent of hostility. Imagine a scene in a Neolithic village. A child has broken a valuable clay pot, a vessel that took weeks to coil and fire. The father, tired from the fields, his hands rough with the memory of the soil, towers over the child in anger. He raises his voice. The child, overwhelmed by the looming figure and the booming sound, begins to cry. The eyes fill. The vision blurs. The child looks up but sees only a towering, blurry shape. The father stops. He sees the handicap in action. He sees the child has already punished itself by surrendering its primary sense. The anger dissipates, replaced by the urge to comfort. He kneels. He wipes the tears away, restoring the child's sight. In this act of wiping away the tear, he is accepting the surrender. He is saying, "Peace is restored. You can see again." This dynamic of blurring and restoring became a fundamental rhythm of human relationships. We break contact, we blur the world with tears, and then we are comforted, and the world is brought back into focus, sharper and clearer than before. However, the surrender of sight is not without its risks. It is a gamble. It relies on the empathy of the observer. If the observer is a predator, a lion or a wolf, the tear is a dinner bell, and the blurred vision is a death sentence. A lion does not care about the handicap principle. A lion does not feel pity. This is why we generally do not cry when facing a predator. The fight-or-flight response in the face of a non-human threat is dry-eyed and wide-pupiled. We need to see the lion to escape it. The emotional tear is reserved for the human audience. It is a signal evolved specifically for the eyes of our own kind. It presumes a shared social contract. It presumes that the person watching possesses the neural circuitry to decode the message. It is a communication sent on a frequency that only other humans can hear. But what happens when that contract is broken? What happens when we cry in front of a human who has shut down their empathy? The psychopath, the enemy in the heat of battle, the tormentor. In these cases, the surrender of sight becomes a tragedy. The defense mechanism fails. The shield of water is pierced. This is the dark side of the adaptation. By evolving to be vulnerable, we opened ourselves to exploitation. There are those in history who have mocked the tear, who have seen it not as a flag of truce, but as a sign of weakness to be crushed. The tear is a bet placed on the goodness of the other. It is a wager that says, "I believe your humanity is stronger than your aggression." And more often than not, throughout the long, hard history of our species, that bet has paid off. If it hadn't, we would have stopped crying eons ago. The fact that we still weep, that we still blur our vision in moments of crisis, is statistical proof that mercy has prevailed more often than cruelty. Let us examine the physics of this blurred world. When the eye fills with tears, the refraction of light changes. The tear film is no longer a smooth, curved lens. It becomes irregular. Light scatters. The world becomes a bouquet of soft shapes and merged colors. There is a strange beauty in this. When we are in deep grief, the world often feels too harsh, too sharp, too detailed. The pain is precise. The loss is jagged. Perhaps the blurring of sight is also a mercy to the self. It softens the hard edges of reality. It puts a veil between the sufferer and the source of their suffering. It forces the individual to turn inward, to retreat from the visual world and attend to the emotional landscape within. In the silence of the Paleolithic night, when a hunter mourned the loss of a mate, the tears that filled his eyes did more than signal his grief to the tribe. They physically prevented him from looking at the empty space where she used to sleep. They prevented him from seeing the tools she would no longer use. They enforced a period of visual rest, a withdrawal from the external world, allowing the internal work of grieving to take place. It is a biological timeout. The body says, "You cannot engage with the world right now. You must process this." We can also look at the tear through the lens of resource allocation. The brain consumes 20% of the body's energy. Visual processing takes up a massive chunk of that. The visual cortex is hungry. By blurring the vision, by degrading the input, the brain might be subtly shifting resources. It is saying, "We do not need high-definition vision right now. We need emotional processing. We need memory consolidation. We need chemical rebalancing." The tear draws the curtain on the stage of the world so that the scene can be changed behind the scenes. As we walk through the museum of our own physiology, we must stop and marvel at this specific exhibit, the blurry eye. It is a testament to the fact that survival is not always about strength. It is not always about the sharpest claw or the keenest eye. Sometimes survival is about the ability to be soft. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to blind yourself to the fight. Imagine the countless conflicts that were diffused by this mechanism. The tribal wars that ended in a truce because a leader wept. The domestic disputes that ended in an embrace because a partner cried. The punishments that were stayed because a child's vision blurred. These are the silent victories of the tear. They are not recorded in the history books, which focus on battles won by blood, but they are recorded in the genome. We are here because our ancestors knew when to surrender. And so, the tear became a vestige of a different kind of courage, the courage to be seen as weak, the courage to lose control, the courage to trust. In the modern world, we often fight this surrender. We live in a culture that values clarity, focus, and control. We are told to keep our eyes on the prize, to stay sharp, to never let them see you cry. We wear sunglasses to hide our eyes. We turn away when we feel the sting of tears. We apologize for our weakness. But the body knows better. The body knows that there is power in the blur. Tonight, as you rest, consider the times you have fought back tears. Consider the strain of trying to keep the world in focus when your biology wanted to let it dissolve. And then consider the relief of finally letting go. The moment the dam breaks, the moment the world goes soft and watery, the moment you stop trying to aim, stop trying to defend, and simply are. It is a return to the ancient truce. It is a return to the safety of the tribe. The surrender of sight is not a loss of vision. It is an exchange of vision. We trade the sharp, predatory sight of the hunter for the soft, introspective sight of the healer. We trade the ability to see the enemy for the ability to see the self. And deep in the code of life, the instruction remains, carved by millions of years of negotiation between the weak and the strong. When the pain is too great, let the water rise. Let the world fade. Blind yourself to the danger and trust that you will be caught. This is the promise of the tear. It is the ancient contract of the species, signed in the fluid of our own eyes, that says we do not have to face the darkness alone. We can close our eyes or let them fill with water and know that someone, somewhere, is watching over us. As the chapter of the surrender of sight closes, we see that the tear has transformed again. It began as a washer of dust. It became a signal in the dark. It became a river of stress hormones. And now, it has become a flag of truce. But the journey is not over. The tear has one more transformation to undergo. It must become a sound. It must find a voice. For in the growing complexity of the human experience, the visual signal was sometimes not enough. The tear needed a partner, and that partner was the sob. But that is a story for the next drift of time, as we move from the silent surrender of the eye to the shaking, heaving surrender of the breath. For now, let the vision blur. Let the sharp edges of the day soften. Let the handicap take over, for in this safe place, you have no need to aim, no need to fight, and no need to see the horizon. You are safe in the blur. Let us drift back now, through the veil of years, to a time when the world was vast, wild, and largely unspoken. The great libraries of human language had not yet been built. The air was not yet thick with the complex geometries of grammar, syntax, and abstract nouns. We are in the Middle Paleolithic, perhaps 200,000 years ago. It is a world where the primary soundscapes are the wind shifting through the canopy of ancient oaks, the rhythmic thunder of hooves on the steppe, and the insect hum of the heat. In this era, the human voice was still an instrument in its tuning phase, capable of grunts, sharp warnings, guttural commands, and the soft, crooning melodies of comfort, but not yet the precise tool of philosophy or storytelling. In this silence, the face became the primary billboard of intent. It was the screen upon which the drama of the tribe was projected. If you were to stand before one of our ancestors in the twilight of a deep cave, you would see a landscape of muscular complexity that no other animal possesses. Beneath the skin, a web of 43 distinct facial muscles, the zygomaticus major, the orbicularis oculi, the corrugator supercilii, twitched and pulled, creating a vocabulary of expression more immediate and honest than any word. But in the dim light of the Stone Age, in the gloom of the dense forest, the charcoal darkness of the cave, or the silvery monochrome of the moonlit savannah, a grimace or a frown might be lost in the shadows. The face needed a highlighter. It needed a way to amplify its signal, to make the internal state of the soul visible even in the lowest light. Enter the tear. We must visualize the optics of this adaptation to truly understand its genius. Imagine a dark face, rich with the melanin required to survive the equatorial sun. It is a matte surface, absorbing the light. Now, imagine a single track of saline fluid emerging from the eye. The tear is water, but it is also a lens. It has surface tension. It creates a convex curve. When even the faintest photon of light, from the moon, from the stars, from the dying embers of a hearth, strikes this fluid, it does not absorb. It reflects. It gleams. In the stark, high-contrast world of the prehistoric night, a tear is not merely a byproduct of emotion. It is a pyrotechnic display. It is a streak of liquid starlight running down the cheek. It is a visual shout, undeniable and arresting. It turns the face into a beacon. This evolution of the high-contrast signal was a pivot point in our social history. It transformed the tear from a personal biological function into a public declaration. It suggests that our ancestors were becoming creatures of the visual, relying on the eyes not just to hunt, but to understand the hearts of their kin. It was a signal designed to cut through the noise of the environment, a silent frequency that could be broadcast without breaking the stillness required for survival. Let us step into the skin of a hunter in the late Pleistocene to understand the desperate necessity of this silent signal. The setting is a dense woodland in what is now Europe. The air is cold, smelling of damp moss, pine resin, and the metallic tang of impending snow. A small hunting party moves through the undergrowth. They are tracking a red deer, a creature of immense sensitivity, whose ears can rotate to catch the snap of a twig 100 yards away. The hunters move as one organism. They do not speak. To speak is to starve. The silence is heavy, a physical weight that presses against their eardrums. Every movement is calculated. Every breath is measured. One of the hunters, a young male, moves to flank the prey. As he shifts his weight, he steps onto a patch of loose scree hidden beneath the ferns. His foot slips. He twists his knee violently. The pain is a sudden white-hot explosion that tears through his nervous system. In a less cooperative species, or in a different time, he might roar. The instinct to vocalize pain is ancient, rooted in the reptilian brain. But he knows the rules of the hunt. He knows that a sound now would send the deer vanishing into the mist, leaving the tribe hungry for another week. He bites his tongue. He clamps his jaw shut. He forces the scream back down his throat. But the energy of that pain must go somewhere. And so, it surges to his eyes. He leans against the rough bark of a pine tree, his face contorted in agony. His hunting partner, a few yards away, senses the disruption in the rhythm of the stalk. He turns his head. He cannot hear a whimper. He cannot hear a groan. The forest is silent. But a shaft of moonlight filtering through the canopy catches the face of the injured man. There, glistening against the dark skin, is the signal. A wet, shining track runs from the eye to the jaw. The partner sees it instantly. The high-contrast signal works. He does not need to ask, "Are you hurt?" He does not need to whisper, "What is wrong?" The tear says it all. It communicates the intensity of the pain. It is pain great enough to cause weeping, pain that overrides the stoicism of the hunt. The partner signals the others with a hand gesture. They halt. They circle back. They support the injured man, helping him limp away, leaving the deer undisturbed but the tribe intact. The tear allowed for a communication of vulnerability that did not compromise the safety of the group. It was a secure channel, a way of broadcasting distress that was encrypted by the requirement of line of sight. A scream travels in all directions. It alerts the predator and the prey alike. A tear travels only to those looking at you. It is a directed beam of information. This directional nature of the tear created a profound shift in human intimacy. It created what we might call the circle of proximity. To see a tear, you must be close. You cannot spot a weeping eye from across a valley. You cannot see it from the top of a distant ridge. You must be within the intimate zone, within 10 feet, within arm's reach, within the range of an embrace. Thus, the biology of the tear forced us together. It demanded that if we were to understand each other, we had to be near each other. Consider the domestic life of the Paleolithic cave. The fire has burned low, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls where ochre paintings of bison and horses seem to move in the flickering light. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of curing hides. The tribe is asleep, a pile of furs and limbs. A mother wakes. Her child is stirring. In the darkness, she cannot see the flush of fever or the pallor of sickness. But as she leans over, the dying embers cast a faint orange glow. She sees the glint. The child is crying silently. The tears are catching the light, acting as tiny mirrors reflecting the fire. This signal bypasses her cognitive brain and hits her limbic system. She does not need to analyze. She knows. The silence of the cave remains unbroken. The men continue to sleep, resting for tomorrow's hunt. But the communication between mother and child is absolute. She gathers him up. She offers the breast. She rocks him. The signal has done its work. This silent frequency was the glue of the night. It allowed for a layer of emotional maintenance to happen in the quiet hours, strengthening the bonds of the family unit without disrupting the rest of the group. It allowed for a private language of love and suffering. But we must also consider the evolutionary duality here, the cost of this signal. By evolving a visual distress signal, we made ourselves harder to read from a distance, but infinitely more transparent up close. We traded range for resolution. We traded the broadcast power of the howl for the high-fidelity data of the weep. This shift suggests that our ancestors were facing a new kind of challenge. The greatest threats were no longer just the lions on the savannah, threats that required loud alarms. The greatest challenges were becoming internal: social cohesion, the management of grief, the navigation of complex relationships. For these problems, a loud scream is a blunt instrument. A tear is a scalpel. It allows for nuance. A tear can mean physical pain, yes, but it can also mean I am sorry, or I am grateful, or I am overwhelmed. And because this signal is silent, it invites the observer to come closer to investigate. A scream says, "Stay away," or "Run," but a tear says, "Come here." It acts as a gravitational force, pulling bodies together. When we see someone crying, our instinct, if we are bonded to them, is to close the gap, to wipe the tear away, to offer the tactile comfort of a touch. In this way, the tear sculpted our social behavior. It encouraged the huddle. It encouraged the embrace. It turned the human group into a tactile organism, constantly reinforcing its bonds through touch, initiated by the visual cue of the wet eye. Let us look deeper into the ancient accident of this design. Why water? Why not a change in skin color, like the flushing of a cheek? Why not a scent? Water is dynamic. It moves. The human eye is evolved to detect motion, a legacy of our predator-prey past. A stationary signal like a bruise or a rash might be missed in the low light. But a tear flows. It catches the light and moves across the face. This movement triggers the motion detectors in the visual cortex of the observer. It is impossible to ignore. It is a living signal, happening in real time. It tells the observer that the emotion is happening now. It is not a scar of past pain. It is the active presence of current feeling. Furthermore, the tear interacts with the anatomy of the human eye itself. As discussed in the whispers of previous chapters, humans are unique in having a visible white sclera. This white background allows us to track the direction of a gaze. But when the eye fills with tears, the contrast is heightened even further. The glassy, wet surface amplifies the whites, making the eyes appear larger, more luminous, more open. This phenomenon, the glassy-eyed look, signals a state of heightened arousal and reduced aggression. It makes the crier look younger, more infant-like. It triggers the Kinchin schema response in adults, the biological urge to nurture. Even a battle-hardened warrior, seeing the glint of tears in the eyes of a peer, is subject to this ancient biological programming. The signal bypasses his logic and pulls on the strings of his empathy. We can imagine the day in the life of a tribe where this signal failed, a tribe that had not developed the silent tear. In such a group, distress would have to be vocalized. Nighttime in their camp would be a cacophony of fretting children and groaning adults. The predators would be drawn in. The sleep of the hunters would be disturbed. The social bonds, lacking the nuanced glue of shared silent vulnerability, would be brittle. Such a tribe would be at a disadvantage. They would be outcompeted by the quiet, weeping tribes who knew how to signal their hearts without shouting. And so, the quiet ones inherited the earth. As we moved out of the Stone Age and into the era of complexity, this silent signal remained a cornerstone of our humanity. Think of the lovers in the Neolithic village, parting ways as a hunting party leaves for a long expedition. Words are insufficient. They are clumsy tools for the enormity of separation. But the look, the long, silent gaze with eyes swimming in tears, conveys everything. It conveys the fear of loss, the promise of return, the depth of the bond. It is a conversation that happens in the span of a heartbeat, mediated by the reflection of light on water. Think of the rituals of the first religions, the shaman in the trance, weeping before the fire. The tears are seen by the tribe as a connection to the spirit world, a physical manifestation of the invisible. The glistening track on the cheek becomes a mark of the divine, a sign that the shaman is seeing things the others cannot. The tear becomes sacred. Even today, in our world of electric lights and digital screens, the power of this ancient signal remains undimmed. When we watch a film and a character cries, we are moved not by the sound of their sobbing, which can be acted, but by the sight of the tear itself, that unfakeable physiological truth. When we see a photo of a stranger in a war zone, it is the glint of the tear that pierces our indifference. The signal without sound is a testament to the fact that we are, at our core, creatures of light and reflection. We evolved to find each other in the dark. We evolved to read the weather of the soul by watching the rain fall on the faces of those we love. As you lie there now, in the safety of your own space, perhaps illuminated by the faint glow of a street lamp or the moon outside your window, consider the power of the silence that surrounds you. It is not an empty silence. It is a space waiting for the subtle signals of intimacy. You carry this ancient technology with you. You have the ability to speak without words, to shout without sound, to draw those you love into the circle of your protection simply by letting your defenses down. The tear is a reminder that we were never meant to suffer alone. It is a signal designed to be answered. It is a lighthouse beam sweeping across the dark ocean of existence, looking for a safe harbor. And as the chapter of the signal without sound draws to a close, we realize that this visual language was just the beginning. It brought us together. It forced us to look at one another. But once we were close, once we were held in that circle of intimacy, something else began to happen. The tear, rich with chemicals, began to do work that the eye could not see. It began to heal the mind from the inside out. The signal was sent, but the sender was also being changed. We turn now to the chemistry of solace, to the microscopic pharmacy that flows within the river of the weep. The world of the late Pleistocene was a place of imposing, crushing magnitude, a landscape where the physical elements conspired to remind our ancestors of their own smallness. Let us cast our minds back 20,000 years to the deep freeze of the last glacial maximum. The northern hemisphere is locked in a white coma. The glaciers have advanced like slow, grinding mountains of blue ice, burying the memory of the warm earth. The wind here is not merely air in motion, it is a physical assault, a razor of frost that flays the skin and steals the breath. In this vast, monochrome cathedral of ice and granite, the silence is profound. It is a silence broken only by the groaning of the shifting ice sheets and the crack of frozen timber. Here, in the twilight of a winter day that spans only a few gray hours, a small clan of humans has taken shelter. They are huddled in the belly of a limestone cave, a shallow throat of rock that offers a fragile sanctuary against the biting cold. The air inside is thick, layered with the smell of burning peat, damp fur, and the metallic tang of drying meat. The fire is the heart of their universe, a flickering orange god that demands constant feeding. Around this fire, the faces of our ancestors are illuminated, faces etched with the hard lines of survival, skin weather-beaten and scarred, eyes deep-set and watchful. In this environment, where energy is the most precious currency, nature is rarely wasteful. Every calorie hunted is counted. Every ounce of body heat is guarded. The human body is a masterpiece of efficiency, a vessel designed to hoard resources against the lean times. Evolution does not tolerate the superfluous. It does not create plumbing for the sake of decoration. And yet, in the midst of this brutal economy of survival, the human body does something seemingly extravagant. It produces water. It produces a saline stream that does not hydrate the body, but rather leaves it. When a member of this clan, perhaps a hunter who has lost his brother to the tusk of a mammoth, or a mother whose child did not survive the fever of the long night, begins to weep, they are engaging in a biological process that seems, at first glance, to be a waste of precious fluids. Why, in a world where thirst is a constant threat, would the body expel water? Why, in a world where salt is vital for nerve function, would the body pour it into the dust? To answer this, we must look beyond the surface. We must look into the microscopic alchemy of the tear itself. For as the emotional tear evolved, drifting away from the simple utilitarian function of the basal tear, the windshield wiper of the eye, its chemical composition began to shift. It transformed from a simple saline wash into a complex bioactive potion. If we were to take a tear of pure grief, shed in that Paleolithic cave, and place it under the microscope of deep time, we would not see clear water. We would see a viscous, heavy fluid. We would see a substance that is chemically distinct from the tears caused by wind or smoke or the cutting of a wild onion. The reflex tear is light, mostly water and a little salt, designed to rinse and run. But the emotional tear, the psychogenic tear, is richer. It is laden with proteins. It carries a heavy cargo. Floating within this microscopic ocean are molecules of profound significance. They are the silent ingredients of solace. First, let us identify the weight of the tear. It is known that emotional tears contain a significantly higher concentration of proteins, up to 24% higher, than their reflex counterparts. This gives the emotional tear a different texture. It falls slower. It clings to the cheek. It lingers on the skin, as if to ensure it is seen, as if to prolong the signal. But these proteins are not just for texture. They are the carriers of a specific biological payload. Among these ingredients is a molecule known as leucine enkephalin. The name sounds clinical, a dry term from a modern laboratory, but its function is ancient and deeply compassionate. Leucine enkephalin is a neurotransmitter. It is an endogenous opioid. In simpler terms, it is a natural painkiller, a morphine of the mind, produced by the body's own internal pharmacy. Consider the implications of this. When the hunter weeps for his lost brother, he is not just expressing pain, he is medicating it. The act of crying releases this natural opioid into the system. It is a balm applied directly to the raw nerves of the psyche. Evolution, in its mercy, understood that the pain of emotional loss activates the same neural pathways as physical injury. To the brain, a broken heart and a broken leg are frighteningly similar. Both signal a threat to survival. Both trigger a cascade of agony. And so, the body treats them with the same medicine. The tear is the delivery mechanism for this anesthetic. It is a way of numbing the sharpest edges of the grief, dulling the ache just enough to allow the human to keep breathing, to keep existing. But the chemistry of the tear is not just about adding comfort. It is also about subtracting poison. Also found in high concentrations within the emotional tear is a substance called adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. To understand ACTH is to understand the very nature of stress in the prehistoric world. Imagine the days leading up to the grief. The clan has been under immense pressure. The herds have moved south. The cold has deepened. The predators are circling. The human body is flooded with the chemistry of fight or flight. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is pumping through the veins like a drumbeat of alarm. It sharpens the senses, tenses the muscles, and halts digestion. It prepares the animal to survive a crisis. But this state of high arousal is toxic if sustained. If cortisol remains in the blood for too long, it begins to destroy the body. It weakens the immune system. It clouds the judgment. It eats away at the muscle. It turns the survival mechanism into a death sentence. The body needs a way to come down. It needs a way to purge this excess energy, this buildup of chemical alarm. The kidneys filter the blood, yes, but they are slow. The sweat glands release toxins, yes, but in the freezing cold of the Ice Age, sweating is dangerous. It leads to hypothermia. The body needed a rapid, efficient ejection valve for the chemicals of stress. Enter the eye. The presence of ACTH in tears suggests that the act of crying is literally a process of excretion. It is a biological purging. When our ancestors wept in the corner of that cold cave, they were not just signaling their distress to the tribe. They were physically wringing the stress out of their bodies. They were shedding the toxins of trauma through the eyes. Visualize the weeping hunter. As the tears flow, they are carrying away the molecular residue of his fear and his anxiety. He is crying out the stress hormones that have built up during the long, terrifying weeks of the hunt. He is emptying the reservoir. The tear is a kidney for the soul, filtering the blood of its emotional waste products. There is another element here, often overlooked: manganese. Manganese is a mineral, an element forged in the hearts of dying stars, found in the soil and the water. It is essential for life, but in the human body, an excess of manganese is associated with mood disturbances, specifically with feelings of heaviness, aggression, and anxiety. It is a mineral of dark moods. Studies have shown that the concentration of manganese in emotional tears is 30 times greater than its concentration in the blood serum. 30 times. This is a staggering difference. It suggests that the lacrimal gland is actively concentrating this mineral, pulling it from the blood to expel it. When we feel heavy with sadness, when we feel weighted down by the world, it is not just a metaphor. It may well be a physiological reality, a buildup of manganese and other neurochemicals that dampen the spirit. When we cry, we are literally lightening the load. We are mining the heavy metals from our own psyche and casting them out. We are lowering the mineral weight of our despair. This chemical purging explains the profound physical sensation that follows a good, hard cry. We have all felt it, that sudden, exhausted calm. The storm passes, the breathing slows, the muscles, which had been tight as bowstrings, go slack. The mind, which had been racing with the frantic energy of grief, becomes quiet, almost blank. This is the leveling off. It is the biological reset button. In the context of the Pleistocene, this reset was not a luxury. It was a survival imperative. Imagine if the grief of the ancestor had no end. Imagine if the stress hormones continued to circulate indefinitely. The hunter would remain paralyzed, unable to focus, unable to sleep, unable to cooperate. He would be a liability to the clan. He would miss the signs of the leopard. He would fail to secure the kill. A depression that lasts too long in the wild is fatal. The tear was the mechanism that ensured grief was a process, not a permanent state. It allowed the human to descend into the depths of sorrow, to fully experience the loss, and then, crucially, to recover. It allowed the chemistry of the body to return to baseline. Let us watch this process unfold in our ancient cave. The weeping man has been crying for some time. His shoulders have heaved with the convulsions of the sob, another physical mechanism, the diaphragm spasming to pump blood and oxygen, cooling the brain and further releasing tension. Now, the tears slow. The flow of leucine and kephalin has done its work, dulling the sharp point of the agony. The ACTH has been flushed out, lowering his cortisol levels. The manganese has been reduced. He sits back against the cold stone wall. He is tired, deeply tired. But the frantic, vibrating anxiety is gone. He feels washed clean. The firelight dances in his eyes, which are no longer blurry with water but clear. He takes a deep breath, and the air fills his lungs without the hitch of the sob. He looks around the circle of his kin. He sees their faces, soft with empathy. He accepts a piece of dried meat. He has survived the emotional winter. He has endured the internal storm. And because of this chemical catharsis, he will be able to sleep tonight. And because he sleeps, he will be able to stand up tomorrow morning. This is the genius of the adaptation. The tear did not remove the cause of the grief. The brother is still gone, the child is still lost, but it removed the paralyzing toxicity of the grief. It allowed the ancestor to release the pressure of survival and face the hunt once again. We must also consider the role of prolactin in this chemical soup. Prolactin is a hormone best known for its role in lactation, in the production of milk. But it is also a hormone of comfort, of immune system regulation, and of tear production. It is present in high levels in the tears of both men and women, though higher in women, which may explain the variance in crying frequency. Prolactin is the hormone of gathering in. It is associated with the nesting instinct, with safety, with the cessation of striving. When we cry and prolactin floods our system, it encourages a state of rest. It tells the body, the struggle is over for now. Be still. Be safe. In the brutal, high-stakes world of the Stone Age, these moments of chemically induced stillness were vital. They were the pauses between the notes of violence, the necessary rests that prevented the symphony of human life from becoming a chaotic noise. As we drift further into this idea, we can see the tear as a form of ancient medicine. Long before we discovered the willow bark for pain or the poppy for sleep, our bodies were manufacturing their own remedies. The lacrimal gland was the first apothecary. It dispensed the precise dose of painkiller and tranquilizer needed to treat the wounds that could not be seen. Compare this to our animal cousins. A wolf may lick its wounds to clean them with saliva, which has antiseptic properties. We, too, lick our physical wounds. But for the wounds of the heart, for the existential dread of our growing consciousness, we evolved a different fluid. We evolved a fluid that cleanses not the skin, but the mind. This chemical complexity also sheds light on the mystery of uncontrollable weeping. Why, when we are truly devastated, can we not stop the flow? It is because the body knows better than the conscious mind what is needed. The hypothalamus, sensing the toxic levels of stress, overrides the will. It opens the floodgates because it must. To stop the tears would be to keep the poison inside. The body is seizing control to save itself. Deep in the night of prehistory, this chemistry bound us together. The smell of tears, though faint to our modern noses, may have been a powerful signal to our ancestors. We know that tears contain chemosignals. A recent study suggests that the smell of female tears can reduce testosterone and aggression in males. Imagine the scene. A domestic dispute in the cave, tempers flaring, violence threatening to erupt. The female weeps. The scent of the tears, carrying these chemical messengers, wafts through the close air. It hits the olfactory receptors of the male. His testosterone drops, his aggression blunted. The chemistry of the tear acts as a peacekeeping force, a pheromonal treaty that de-escalates the conflict. Thus, the tear worked on two levels: internally, to soothe the weeper, and externally, to chemically pacify the tribe. It was a masterpiece of social engineering, written in molecules. As the glaciers retreated and the world warmed, as the great forests returned and humanity spread into the green valleys of the Neolithic, we carried this internal pharmacy with us. The challenges of survival changed. We faced famine, plague, war, but the need for solace remained constant. The tear remained the universal healer. And now, bring your attention to the present moment. To the feeling of your own body as you rest. You are the inheritor of this ancient technology. The same glands that soothed the hunter of the mammoth are waiting behind your eyelids. The same chemicals that allowed your ancestors to endure the Ice Age are flowing through your veins. When you have a good cry, you are not being weak. You are engaging a sophisticated biological maintenance cycle that has been refined over 200,000 years. You are flushing the engine. You are resetting the system. You are partaking in the oldest ritual of self-care. Think of the tear not as water, but as a liquid memory of every grief your lineage has survived. Think of it as a river that flows out of the brain, carrying the debris of the day down to the sea, leaving the banks of your mind clean and fertile. The calm that you feel after crying, that heavy, sleepy, peaceful sensation, is the gift of the leucine enkephalin. It is the touch of the ancestor's hand, reaching across the eons to say, "It is over. You have survived. You can rest now." The night outside is dark, just as it was for them. The world is still vast and uncertain, but within you, the chemistry of solace is standing guard. You have a mechanism for joy, and a mechanism for sorrow, and a mechanism to bring you back to the center. The storm will always pass. The rain will always cease, and the earth of the soul will be left moist and ready for the new growth of the morning. This is the promise written in the chemistry of the tear. And as the waters of the mind settle, we begin to see that this individual healing was only part of the story. For the tear did not just heal the one who wept, it glued the tribe together. It was the spark that lit the first fires of compassion. It was the gravity that pulled us into the first true societies. The next chapter of our story moves from the chemistry of the individual to the physics of the group, the glue of the first fires. The sun retreats, surrendering the world to the dominion of the night. In the deep prehistory of our species, this transition was not merely a shift in light, but a fundamental alteration of reality. The temperature plummets, and the wind, stripping the heat from the land, begins to howl through the gorges and across the open steppes. We find ourselves in the Middle Pleistocene, perhaps 400,000 years ago, standing on the precipice of a revolution that has nothing to do with stone tools or spear points, but everything to do with the invisible architecture of the heart. Consider for a moment the physical inadequacy of the human animal. If you were to strip us of our culture, our tools, and our fire, and place us naked on the savannah or the tundra, we would be pitifully ill-equipped for survival. We have no fur to trap the air against our skin. We are naked apes, shivering in the draft. We have no claws to rend flesh. Our fingernails are flat and fragile, barely capable of scratching the earth. We have no fangs to puncture the jugular of a predator. Our teeth are small, designed for grinding roots and chewing cooked meat. We are slow runners compared to the leopard. We are weak swimmers compared to the crocodile. In the brutal inventory of nature's armory, we are surprisingly unarmed. And yet we conquered the planet. We survived the ice that buried continents. We survived the volcanoes that choked the sky. How? The answer lies in the circle of light that flickers in the center of the camp. It lies in the hearth, a word that shares its etymological roots with heart. The true strength of the human species has never been our claws or our teeth. It has always been our ability to bond. We are obligate social creatures. We are biological components that cannot function in isolation. Like the bee separated from the hive, a lone human in the Stone Age was a dead human. Our survival strategy was not armor, but connection. And the mechanism that forged that connection, the catalyst that turned a loose association of individuals into a monolithic organism of survival, was the emotional tear. Let us step into the warmth of that first fire. It is a small, controlled miracle, a captured piece of the sun, fed by dry branches and guarded by the elders. The fire did more than cook meat or ward off the saber-toothed cats. It created a stage. Before the control of fire, the night was a time of hiding, of silence, of individual fear. But with the fire came the night shift of social evolution. The day was for hunting and gathering, for the practical mechanics of staying alive. But the night, illuminated by the hearth, was for the mind. It was for the soul. In this flickering orange light, the face became the focus of the world. The darkness pressed in from all sides, creating a natural amphitheater where the only visible reality was the circle of other faces. And in this high-contrast environment, the tear became the social glue that hardened the bonds of the tribe. Imagine a night in a cave in the Dordogne or a shelter in the Rift Valley. The tribe is gathered. They are exhausted. The stress of the day, the near misses, the hunger, the physical exertion, sits heavy on their shoulders. A young hunter, perhaps injured or overcome by the sheer weight of existence, begins to weep. In the stark light of the fire, the tears on his face glisten. They act as prisms, catching the flames and reflecting them back to the group. This visual signal is impossible to ignore. And as the others watch him, something profound happens within their own brains, a phenomenon that neuroscientists call the mirror response. Deep in the frontal and parietal lobes of the human brain, there are clusters of neurons that perform a kind of biological magic. These are the mirror neurons. They do not distinguish between doing and seeing. When you see someone smile, your mirror neurons fire as if you are smiling yourself. When you see someone wince in pain, your brain registers a phantom echo of that pain. And when you see someone cry, particularly in the intimate, defenseless setting of the firelight, your brain simulates their sorrow. This was the birth of empathy. It was a neural echo, a sympathetic vibration that allowed one nervous system to tune itself to the frequency of another. It was the moment where I became we. In the animal kingdom, weakness is often a death sentence. To show vulnerability is to invite aggression. The wolf that limps is marginalized. The bird that cannot fly is left behind. But in the human circle, the tear inverted this logic. Because of the mirror response, the sight of tears did not elicit aggression. It elicited discomfort in the observer. To see your kin suffering was to suffer yourself. To stop your own internal pain, you had to stop theirs. Thus, to ignore a crying companion was to weaken the group because it left the stress unresolved. It left a fracture in the collective psyche. To comfort them was to heal the group. It was to strengthen the collective resilience. The tear, therefore, became a solicitation for care that transcended the biological imperative of the mother-child bond. This is a crucial distinction. A mother comforting her crying infant is evolutionary standard practice. It ensures the survival of her genes. But in the firelight of the Paleolithic, tears began to elicit caregiving behavior in unrelated adults. Imagine a scenario. An older man, a veteran of many winters, sees a young, unrelated woman weeping over a broken tool or a scarcity of food. His genes are not in her. By the cold logic of selfish gene evolution, he should ignore her. He should conserve his energy for his own offspring. But the tear hacks his programming. The mirror neurons fire. He feels a pang of distress. He moves closer. He offers a grunt of reassurance. He shares a piece of honeycomb. This is the birth of altruism. It is a behavior that seems to defy the laws of competition, yet it is the very secret of our success. The tear fostered a culture where resources were shared based on need, not just on dominance. It allowed the group to distribute the burden of suffering. Think of grief as a physical weight, a heavy stone that every human must carry at some point. If an individual tries to carry the stone of profound loss alone, it will crush them. They will be unable to hunt, unable to forage, unable to watch the horizon. They will perish. But the tear allows them to signal the weight. It invites the tribe to come forward and place their hands under the stone. When the tribe weeps together, mourning the death of a leader or the failure of a hunt, they are engaging in a collective release. They are sharing the load. 10 shoulders can bear what one cannot. This social buffering reduces the physiological cost of stress for the individual. The cortisol levels drop. The heart rates synchronize. The group metabolizes the trauma together, breaking it down into manageable pieces. This shared vulnerability created a loyalty deeper than simple cooperation. Cooperation is transactional. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. It is a contract. But the bond forged by tears is not a contract. It is a covenant. It is emotional. It is irrational. It is the root of what we call love. The tribes that cried together, that understood the liquid language of compassion, were the tribes that stayed together when the winters grew long and the food grew scarce. Let us widen the lens to the landscape of the last glacial maximum, some 20,000 years ago. The world is a harsh, unforgiving place. The ice sheets have pushed the habitable zones into narrow strips. Food is rare. Competition between groups is fierce. Imagine two tribes. The first tribe is stoic. They view tears as weakness. They suppress their emotions. When a member falls into despair, they are ignored or ostracized. They are strong in the traditional sense, hard, unyielding, silent. The second tribe is soft. They are the weepers. When they gather at night, they share their fears. They cry for their dead. They comfort the sick with touch and tears. They have high levels of emotional contagion. When the great hunger comes, when the herds fail to migrate and the snows do not melt, which tribe survives? The stoic tribe fractures. As the stress rises, their lack of emotional release leads to high cortisol, which leads to aggression. They fight over the remaining food. They abandon the weak. The social bonds, brittle and dry, snap under the pressure. They die alone, in the silence of their own strength. The weeping tribe, however, endures. Their ritual of shared sorrow acts as a pressure valve, keeping aggression low despite the stress. Their high empathy levels ensure that the little food they have is shared with the most vulnerable. They huddle closer for warmth, drawn together by the gravity of their shared emotional state. They carry the sick because the pain of leaving them behind is too great to bear. They survive the winter not because they are stronger, but because they are more connected. The tear was the survival advantage. It was the evolutionary technology that allowed us to outsource our regulation. We do not just regulate our own body temperature, we use clothes and fire. We do not just regulate our own emotions, we use each other. This dynamic of bonding through tearing also fundamentally changed the structure of the human brain. The constant requirement to read the emotional states of others, to decode the signal of the tear, exerted a selection pressure on the neocortex. We had to become mind readers. We had to understand not just that someone was crying, but why. Were they crying from physical pain, from grief, from shame, from joy? To distinguish these states requires a theory of mind, the ability to imagine the perspective of another. The tear forced us to become psychologists. It drove the expansion of our social intelligence. We became the species that studies itself. And let us not forget the role of the fire itself in this chemical equation. The fire provides warmth, which relaxes the muscles and lowers the defense mechanisms. The flickering light induces a trance-like state, a hypnagogic rhythm that encourages storytelling and disclosure. The smoke, perhaps, irritates the eyes just enough to lower the threshold for tearing. In this sacred circle, the glue set. Oxytocin, the hormone of trust and bonding, flooded the systems of those who sat together. It flowed when they touched, when they met each other's gaze, when they wept in unison. This hormone is the biochemical signature of love. It tells the brain, "This is my tribe. These are my people. I will die for them." This is why, even today, we feel a primal pull toward the campfire. It is why we tell our deepest secrets in the dark. It is why we cry at the cinema, sitting in the dark with strangers, sharing a collective dream. We are reenacting the ancient ritual of the hearth. We are checking to see if the others are still with us. The glue of the first fires also explains the peculiar human phenomenon of the tears of reunion. When we are reunited with a loved one after a long separation, we weep. Why? It is the resealing of the bond. It is the melting of the ice that grew between us during the separation. The tears act as a sealant, filling the cracks, verifying that the attachment is still alive. It is the body saying, "I am safe again. I am part of the whole again." As the millennia turned and the fires moved from the mouths of caves to the hearths of huts, to the stoves of houses, the function of the tear remained unchanged. It is the watermark of our social contract. Consider the day in the life of a tribe in the Mesolithic. They are passing through a time of crisis, a drought that has turned the green valley to dust. The leader, a woman of wisdom and years, calls the group to the fire. She does not shout. She does not command. She begins to tell the story of the ancestors, of how they survived the great dry times before. As she speaks, her voice cracks. She weeps for the suffering of her grandchildren. Her tears act as a signal to the group. They validate the fear that everyone is feeling, but is too afraid to express. One by one, the others begin to weep. The tension breaks. The isolation dissolves. In that moment of shared sorrow, a new resolve is born. They are not 30 frightened individuals. They are one frightened but determined entity. They will move tomorrow. They will find water. They will do it together. The tear was the catalyst for this unity. It was the spark that ignited the collective will. So as you rest tonight, safe in the shelter of the modern world, remember that your ability to feel, to empathize, to cry for the pain of a stranger is not a flaw. It is your oldest inheritance. It is the echo of the first fire. It is the reason you are here. You are the descendant of the ones who cared. You are the offspring of the ones who did not look away. You carry the genes of the tribe that cried, the tribe that loved, the tribe that survived the long, cold night of the past. The warmth you feel in your heart when you connect with another person is the phantom heat of that ancestral hearth. And the tears you shed are the ancient waters that quenched the thirst of the human spirit when the world was dry and hard. Sleep now, in the knowledge that you are bound to the rest of humanity by these invisible, unbreakable threads. You are part of the great circle. You are never truly alone, for you speak the language of the tear, and that language is spoken by every soul that has ever lived. The fire still burns. The glue still holds. The tribe is all around you. And as the bond of the tribe hardened, as the empathy deep within us became our compass, we began to look outward again. We began to look at the world we inhabited, the water we drank, the shores we walked. And some began to wonder if the salt in our eyes was not just a metaphor for the sea, but a memory of it. The next chapter of our journey takes us from the fire to the tide, from the glue of the land to the ghost of the water. Let us drift now, away from the warmth of the fire and the solid certainty of the earth. Let us leave the cave, with its smoky air and stone walls, and travel to the edge of the world. We move through the corridors of time, past the grassy plains and the dense forests, until we hear a sound that is older than the wind in the trees. It is a rhythmic, hypnotic pulse. It is the sound of the ocean. There is a whisper in the scientific community, a poetic divergence known as the Aquatic Ape hypothesis. It is a ghost story of human evolution, a theory that sits on the periphery of the consensus, debated and often dismissed, yet it possesses a haunting resonance that refuses to fade completely. It offers a dreamlike perspective on the mystery of our bodies, and specifically, on the mystery of our tears. It suggests that perhaps, in a forgotten chapter of our history, a chapter erased by the rising tides of the interglacial periods, our ancestors spent an age not on the dry savannah, but in the shallows of the coasts. Picture, if you will, the Horn of Africa, some 5 million years ago. The Great Afar Triangle is flooding. The Red Sea is spilling over, creating an archipelago of islands, a world of mangroves, estuaries, and salt flats. The heat here is intense, a physical weight that presses down from a white-hot sky. The savannah, with its dangerous predators and its scarcity of water, is a harsh mistress. But here, at the water's edge, there is a different kind of abundance. In this version of our story, our ancestors were lured by the grocery store of the tide. They became waders. They became beachcombers. They stood on the threshold between the land and the sea, occupying the littoral zone, a place of liminal existence. And in doing so, they began to change. Imagine a day in the life of this aquatic ancestor. She stands knee-deep in the warm, turquoise water of a lagoon. The sun beats down on her back, but the water cools her legs, regulating her temperature in a way the air cannot. She is losing her fur. In the water, wet fur is a liability. It is heavy, it creates drag, and it fails to insulate. And so, like the dolphin and the hippo, she is becoming naked. Her skin is becoming smooth, streamlined, protected not by hair, but by a layer of subcutaneous fat, blubber, that provides buoyancy and warmth in the cool currents. She is bipedal, not just to see over the grass, but to keep her head above the water while she wades. She pushes through the gentle resistance of the tide, her feet sensing the ripple of the sand beneath the surface. Her hands, nimble and sensitive, search the muddy bottom. She is foraging for shellfish, oysters, mussels, clams. These are nutrient-dense packets of protein and brain-building fatty acids, immobile and easy to catch, provided one has the intelligence to open them. She finds a rock. She cracks the shell. She swallows the soft, salty flesh of the mollusk. It is a feast. It is a diet rich in the specific nutrients required to build a massive brain: iodine, omega-3s, selenium. It is possible that our intelligence was born not just from the challenge of the hunt, but from the bounty of the sea. But this diet came with a hidden cost, a chemical challenge that the body had to solve. The sea is salt. The shellfish are salt. To live in the ocean, to consume its bounty, is to ingest a dangerous amount of sodium chloride. The kidney, the body's primary filter, has limits. It can only process so much salt before the system becomes dehydrated, before the blood becomes toxic. Look at the other creatures that return to the sea. The sea turtle, the marine iguana, the seabird. They all face the same problem: how to drink the ocean and eat the salt without dying. Nature provided them with a solution. They evolved salt glands. The sea turtle cries salt tears to excrete the excess sodium. The marine iguana sneezes salt from its nose. The seabird drips saline solution from its beak. And here lies the crux of the aquatic dream. Did we, too, evolve a mechanism to weep salt? Consider the human tear. It is salty. We all know the taste of it, that sharp, brine-like flavor that touches the lips when we cry. Is it possible that the profuseness of human weeping, the sheer volume of water we can expel from our eyes, is a vestige of this aquatic interlude? Perhaps long before the tear was a signal of sadness to the tribe, it was a biological pump. It was a way for the aquatic ape to dump the excess salt from a day of feasting on oysters. In this light, the tear is not originally a badge of sorrow, but a badge of survival in a saline world. It was a mechanism of homeostasis. When our ancestor sat on the beach at sunset, her belly full of the sea's harvest, the tears that streamed down her face were not emotional. They were functional. They were the body balancing itself, returning the salt to the sea from whence it came. Whether this hypothesis is geological fact or merely a beautiful myth, The connection remains undeniable. Our tears are salt water. We carry the ocean inside us. Let us deepen this connection to the internal ocean. In the mid-19th century, the physiologist Claude Bernard coined the term milieu intérieur, the internal environment. He realized that our cells do not live in the air, they live in a fluid bath. Our blood plasma, our lymph, our sweat, and our tears, they are all chemically similar to seawater. They contain the same ratio of sodium, potassium, and chloride as the ancient oceans in which the first single-celled organisms swam. We are, in essence, walking bags of the primordial sea. When life crawled out of the ocean some 400 million years ago, it did not leave the water behind. It took the water with it. We built spacesuits of skin to contain our own private ocean, allowing our cells to continue floating in the brine even as we walked across the dry deserts of the continents. The eye is the most exposed part of this internal ocean. It is the only place where the inner sea meets the outer world directly. The cornea has no blood vessels. It must get its oxygen from the air and its nutrients from the tear film. To keep the eye alive on land, we had to invent a way to keep it permanently underwater. That is what a tear is. It is a portable aquarium. Every time you blink, you are recreating the conditions of the Cambrian Ocean. You are washing the eye in the ancient saline solution that birthed the first vision. The first eye evolved in the water. To see on land, we have to fool the eye into thinking it is still underwater. The tear is the deception that allows us to see. So, when we speak of the aquatic ghost, we are speaking of a deep biological memory. We are speaking of the fact that we are water creatures stranded on dry land. This explains our profound, almost spiritual connection to the sea. Why do we flock to the beaches? Why does the sound of the surf soothe us to sleep? Why does floating in water feel like a return to a home we cannot remember? It is because, in the water, the gravity that pulls on our upright frames is canceled. The buoyancy holds us. The diving reflex, a physiological response we share with whales and seals, kicks in. When our faces are submerged in cold water, our heart rate slows, our blood moves to the core, and we enter a state of metabolic calm. We are wired for the water, and the tear is the leak in the vessel. As we moved away from the coasts, if indeed we were ever there, and returned to the inland plains, the need to excrete massive amounts of salt diminished. The kidneys adapted. The diet changed, but the machinery of the weep remained. The salt glands of the eye were waiting for a new purpose. This is where the story of the aquatic ape merges with the story of the emotional human. Evolution is a tinkerer. It rarely throws away a good tool. It repurposes it. The salt dump mechanism, no longer needed for dietary balance, was co-opted by the limbic system. The relief of excretion became the relief of emotional release. The overflowing of the physical vessel became the overflowing of the emotional vessel. Think of the language we use to describe crying. We say we are flooded with grief. We say we are drowning in sorrow. We cry oceans of tears. We speak of waves of emotion crashing over us. These are not accidental metaphors. They are linguistic fossils, pointing back to a time when the fluid dynamics of the body were linked to the tides of the world. When the vessel becomes too full to contain the vastness of our feelings, we spill over. The dam breaks. The internal sea rushes out. Imagine the ancestor again, thousands of generations later. She is no longer on the coast. She is in the deep interior of the continent, but she carries the ghost of the coast in her eyes. When she weeps for a lost child, she is using the same machinery her foremothers used to process the salt of the sea. The salt of her grief is the salt of the ocean. This perspective gives a sacred weight to the act of crying. It suggests that when we cry, we are returning to the source. We are dissolving the boundaries between the self and the biosphere. We are acknowledging that we are fluid, changeable, and tidal. There is a vulnerability in this aquatic nature. Water is soft, yielding, formless. To be a creature of water in a world of stone and iron is to be fragile. But water is also resilient. It flows around obstacles. It wears down the hardest rock. It always finds its level. The vestige of the aquatic ghost reminds us that our softness is our strength. The tear film that protects the eye is only a few microns thick, yet without it, we would be blind. The water that fills our cells is easily lost to evaporation, yet without it, we would be dust. We balance on the razor's edge of hydration. And in the silence of the night, when the day's distractions fade, we can feel this internal tide. We can feel the pulse of the blood, the wetness of the eye, the rhythm of the breath, which is just the exchange of moist air for dry. We can imagine our ancestors standing knee-deep in that ancient surf, the water of the sea meeting the water of the eye, a seamless connection between the inner and outer worlds. The horizon is vast and blue. The sun is setting, painting the water in gold and violet. The ancestor blinks, and a tear falls into the ocean. It is a drop of water returning to its mother. There is no separation. The salt in the tear is the salt in the wave. The life in the body is the life of the sea, temporarily held in a container of skin. This theory, this whisper, may never be proven by the hard evidence of bones and stones. The sea level rises have likely hidden the archaeological evidence of our coastal phase forever, buried under fathoms of blue water. But the evidence is written in the software of our bodies. It is written in the webbing between our fingers, in the layer of fat beneath our skin, and most clearly, in the saline streams that flow from our eyes. We are the apes that learn to swim. We are the apes that learn to weep. And perhaps those two things are the same thing. So, as you lie here, safe and warm, let your mind drift to the sensation of floating. Let the heavy gravity of the land release its hold on your bones. Imagine you are suspended in the warm, primordial waters of the womb, or the ancient lagoon. You are weightless. The water supports you completely. Feel the moisture in your eyes. It is a gift from the deep past. It is the ocean washing the windows of your soul, keeping them clear so that you can see the beauty of the world. You are a vessel of the ancient sea. You are deep and vast and full of life. And when the tears come, as they must in every life, welcome them as the tide. Do not fight the wave. Let it wash over you. Let it cleanse the shore of your mind. For the tide always recedes, leaving the sand smooth and new. We leave the coast now. The water recedes behind us, but we take it with us in our veins and in our eyes. We turn our gaze from the sea back to the land, to the growing complexity of the human mind. For as we mastered the external world, we began to grapple with the terrifying reality of the internal world. We began to understand time. We began to understand the end of things. And the tear, once a washer of dust, once a signal of pain, once a dumper of salt, was about to take on its most profound and heavy burden, the knowledge of death. The wheel of time turns slowly in the deep history of the world. We have traveled far from the sun-drenched dust of the Rift Valley, far from the silent vigils of the savannah hunters, and far from the first flickering hearths where the glue of the tribe was set. We have witnessed the body learn to weep for dust, for pain, for help, and for connection. But now, as the glaciers recede, and the great forests of the Holocene begin to creep northward, we approach a threshold that is less about the landscape of the earth and more about the landscape of the mind. We stand in the twilight of the Stone Age, in the quiet revolution of the Upper Paleolithic. The human animal has changed. The brow ridges have softened. The tools have become delicate blades of flint and bone. The fires burn hotter and brighter. But the most profound change has occurred within the silent, dark vault of the skull. The neocortex, the outer layer of the brain, has expanded. It has folded in upon itself, creating deep valleys and high ridges of gray matter, a labyrinth of neural connections that has granted us a terrible and magnificent gift: the understanding of time. Before this expansion, our ancestors lived in the eternal present. Like the wolf or the deer, they lived in a world of immediate sensation. There was hunger, and then there was food. There was the chase, and then there was the rest. There was the fear of the predator, and then there was the safety of the tree. The past was a fading echo. The future was a mist that had not yet cleared. But with the growth of the frontal lobes, the mist lifted. We began to see the horizon of time. We gained the ability to remember the distant past with crystalline clarity, and to project our minds into the imaginary landscape of the future. We became time travelers. We could plan the hunt for next season. We could remember the location of the waterhole from 10 years ago. This was a supreme survival advantage, but this gift came with a heavy price. It came with a shadow. For when you can see the future, you can see the end of things. When you can understand time, you can understand the cessation of time. We became the only animal on Earth that knows it will die. This terrible knowledge, this awareness of our own finitude and the fragility of those we love, brought with it a new kind of tear. It was not the tear of physical pain, for the body might be whole. It was not the tear of the infant's immediate need, for the belly might be full. It was the tear of existential grief. It was the tear shed not for what is happening now, but for what has happened, and for what will never happen again. It was the tear of absence. Let us step into the sensory world of this new grief. Picture a cave in the Zagros Mountains some 60,000 years ago. It is spring. The air outside is crisp, smelling of wet limestone, melting snow, and the first blooms of the wild yarrow. Inside, the darkness is softened by the glow of tallow lamps. A group of Neanderthals, our cousins, and perhaps our teachers in the art of feeling, are gathered around a shallow pit dug into the cave floor. Lying in the pit is a man. He is not asleep. The stillness of his chest is absolute. The warmth has fled from his skin, replaced by the chill of the clay. In the animal mind, a dead companion is a confused object, something that was once animated and is now broken. An animal might nudge the body, might whimper, might wait for a while. But eventually, the animal moves on. The imperative of life overrides the silence of death. But these beings in the cave do not move on. They stay. They are grappling with a concept that is heavier than any stone they have ever lifted. The concept of forever. Watch the hands of the woman kneeling beside the grave. She is holding something that has no nutritional value, no survival function, no utility in the hunt. She is holding flowers, clusters of bright yellow groundsel, grape hyacinths, and hollyhocks. She has gathered them from the hillside, selecting them for their color, for their scent, for their beauty. With trembling hands, she arranges them around the head of the dead man. She places them on his chest. This is the famous flower burial of Shanidar Cave. It is one of the first hard pieces of evidence we have that the human spirit had transcended the struggle for calories. Why give flowers to the dead? The dead cannot smell them. The dead cannot eat them. The act is a conversation with the void. It is a way of saying, "You matter. You are still here, even though you are gone. I remember you." And as she places the last flower, her face crumbles. The river in the limbic mind surges, but it is triggered by a thought, a memory. She remembers the way he laughed. She remembers the way he shared his meat. She imagines the future without him, the empty space by the fire, the silence in the morning. This cognitive dissonance, the clash between the memory of the living person and the reality of the dead body, wrings the tears from her eyes. These tears falling on the cold earth of the grave are different. They are sophisticated. They require a brain capable of holding two realities at once, presence and absence. They mark the transition from the animal that reacts to the human that reflects. In the silence of that Neolithic night, the sound of weeping for the dead was the sound of humanity grappling with its own finite nature, a sorrowful melody that deepened the soul of the species. This grief was not just a private agony, it became a public architecture. We began to build our cultures around the fact of death. Travel forward in time to the site of Sungir, in what is now Russia, during the bitter depths of the last ice age. Here, we find the graves of two children. They are buried not just with flowers, but with wealth. They are adorned with thousands of ivory beads, each one carved from the tusk of a mammoth. Experimental archaeology tells us that each of these beads took at least an hour to carve, drill, and polish. There are 10,000 beads in the grave. That is 10,000 hours of labor. 10,000 hours of sitting by the fire, scraping bone, drilling holes with a flint awl. Who did this work? It was the parents. It was the tribe. Imagine the scene. The blizzard howling outside the shelter of mammoth bones and hides. The parents, blinded by tears, working the ivory. Every bead is a crystallized tear. Every bead is a unit of time dedicated to a life that has ended. They are weaving their grief into a garment for the journey to the other side. Why invest such energy in the dead? Why bury a fortune of ivory that could be used to trade for food or tools? It is because the tear of grief had evolved into a rite of passage. By engaging in these elaborate rituals, by weeping and working over the dead, the survivors were knitting the fabric of the community back together. They were proving that the individual had value beyond their utility. If a child who has never hunted, never contributed to the caloric bottom line, is buried with the wealth of a king, it means that human worth is intrinsic. It means we are loved simply because we exist. This is the evolutionary duality of grief. On one hand, it is a devastating cost. The grief-stricken parent is vulnerable. They are slow. They are distracted. Their immune system weakens. They burn calories on weeping and sleeplessness. In the ruthless logic of natural selection, grief looks like a handicap. It looks like a flaw. But on the other hand, grief is the ultimate glue. It creates history. By refusing to forget the dead, we created the concept of ancestry. We created the idea that we are part of a long, unbroken chain. The tears shed at the grave water the roots of the culture. They tell the survivors, when you die, you will not be discarded. You will be remembered. you will be honored. This promise of remembrance reduces the existential terror of living. It allows us to face the danger of the hunt and the cruelty of the cold, knowing that we belong to something eternal. Deep in the context of this biography of the body, think of the throat. When we cry from this existential depth, we feel the globus sensation, the lump in the throat, more acutely. It is a muscular spasm, a fight between the need to open the glottis for air, the survival instinct, and the constriction of the throat caused by the attempt to swallow the emotion, the social instinct. We literally choke up. In the presence of death, language often fails. The vocabulary of the hunt, bison, spear, run, is useless against the enormity of loss. And so, the body reverts to the pre-linguistic. The sob becomes the language. The wail becomes the song. We see this in the use of red ochre. At the Kafze cave in Israel, dating back nearly 100,000 years, early Homo sapiens buried their dead stained with red ochre. This iron-rich clay, the color of blood, the color of life, was painted onto the bones or the skin of the deceased. Imagine the intimacy of this act. The survivors, their own hands stained red, touching the cold skin of the beloved. They are trying to give them back their color. They are trying to warm them with the earth itself. It is a desperate, beautiful, artistic gesture. It is the first art. Art did not begin with paintings of horses on a wall. It likely began with the painting of the dead body. It began with the refusal to accept the gray pallor of death as the final truth. The tear, in this context, is the medium of the art. It mixes with the ochre. It binds the pigment. We painted our dead with our own sorrow. This capacity for high-level grief also suggests that we had begun to believe in a world beyond the physical. If the dead are truly gone, why give them beads? Why give them spears? Why give them food? The rituals imply a belief in the ghost. The ghost is not necessarily a supernatural spirit in the modern sense. It is the persistence of the person in the neural networks of the living. When a loved one dies, they do not disappear from your brain. The neural pathways that encoded their face, their voice, their habits, those are still there. They are physical traces in your memory. When you see a landscape they loved, those neurons fire. You see them. You hear them. The brain is predicting their presence, but the senses are reporting their absence. This gap, this glitch between prediction and reality, is the space where the ghost lives, and it is the space where the tear is born. We cry because our brains are still expecting them to walk through the door. We cry because the map of our world still has them on it, but the territory does not. In the long, dark nights of the Pleistocene, these ghosts gathered around the fire with the living. The elders told stories of the ancestors, invoking their names, weeping for their wisdom. The tears served as a summoning ritual. They kept the wisdom of the dead alive. The grandmother hypothesis suggests we survived because older women helped raise the young. Perhaps the ancestor hypothesis suggests we survived because we kept the wisdom of the dead active in our collective memory through the ritual of grief. We must also consider the day in the life of the grieving ancestor during the Neolithic Revolution, when we began to settle and build permanent homes. For the nomad, the dead had to be left behind or buried quickly. But for the settler, the dead could be kept close. In sites like Çatalhöyük in Turkey, we find people buried beneath the floors of the houses. Imagine living in a house where your ancestors are sleeping just inches beneath your feet. You walk over them every day. You sleep above them every night. The membrane between the living and the dead is porous. In such a world, grief is not a singular event. It is a daily cohabitation. The tears shed in the house are absorbed by the clay floor, physically connecting the generations. This proximity transformed death from a terrifying unknown into a domestic reality. It domesticated the ghost. It made the tear a household object, as common as the grinding stone or the hearth. But let us not romanticize the pain. The grief of the cognizant is a heavy burden. It led to the unique human malady of melancholia. We are the only animal that can die of a broken heart. We are the only animal that can choose to end its own life because the psychic pain of loss is greater than the biological drive to survive. This is the shadow side of our intelligence. The same brain that can compose a symphony can also construct a dungeon of despair. And yet, we persisted. We did not evolve to shut off this grief. We evolved to share it. The tear of existential grief is a beacon that says, I am grappling with the infinite. When we see someone crying this kind of tear, the quiet, heavy weeping of deep loss, we approach them with a different kind of reverence than we do for a skinned knee. We recognize the sacredness of their pain. We know they are walking in the valley of the shadow. As you lie here, resting, you might feel the echo of this ancient grief in your own life. Perhaps you have wept for someone who is gone. Perhaps you have wept for the passage of time, for the childhood that is over, for the era that has passed. Know that these tears are the mark of your high status in the animal kingdom. They are the badge of your cognition. You cry because you understand. You cry because you have a mind capable of spanning the eons, capable of loving something more than your own survival. The grief of the cognizant is the price of admission to the human experience, but it is also the source of our deepest beauty. Our poetry, our music, our monuments, the pyramids, the Taj Mahal, the requiems, are all crystallized tears. They are our attempt to answer the silence of death with the beautiful noise of our love. In the silence of your own genome, the memory of those first funerals is still etched. The smell of the wild flowers in the Neanderthal cave still lingers in your capacity for tenderness. The red ochre is still painted on the walls of your heart. We are the creatures who remember. We are the creatures who refuse to let go. And the tear is the chain that binds us to those we have lost, stretching back through the mists of time, unbroken and shimmering. And as we mastered the art of grieving, as we built rituals to contain the overwhelming power of our sorrow, we also began to construct other things. We built walls, we built cities, we built civilizations. And in doing so, we created a world that demanded a new kind of face, a face that could hide, a face that could lie. The tear, so long the badge of truth, was about to meet its greatest adversary, the mask of the modern. But that is the final transformation. For now, let us stay by the grave of the ancestor. Let the flowers be placed. Let the tears fall on the red earth. Let the wind blow through the valley. The dead are at peace, and because we have wept for them, they are not forgotten. You can rest now, held in the great, sorrowful, beautiful memory of your species. And so, the great wheel of time accelerates. We leave behind the silence of the Neolithic burial grounds, where the grief of the cognizant was first laid into the earth with beads and flowers. We leave behind the small, intimate fires of the tribe, where the face of the other was the only book we needed to read. The glaciers retreat to the poles, the sea levels stabilize, and the forests are cleared. The slow, rhythmic drumbeat of the Stone Age, which set the tempo of our hearts for 99% of our history, begins to fade, replaced by a new and frantic cadence. We travel now to the very edge of the timeline, to the blink of an eye that is the modern era. The landscape of the earth has been transformed. The sprawling golden savannah has been replaced by canyons of concrete and steel, rising like artificial cliffs into a sky that is often bleached of stars. The dark, sheltering caves have been traded for boxes of glass and light, stacked one atop the other in the vertical villages of the city. The campfire, once the center of our social gravity, has been replaced by the cold, blue glow of screens, millions of digital hearths that offer light but no warmth. Yet, as we walk through these electric avenues, amidst the roar of engines and the hum of servers, we must acknowledge a profound and unsettling truth. The biological machinery remains untouched. We are temporal castaways. We are Stone Age creatures living in a Space Age world. We are walking around with the same hardware, the same neural wiring, and the same chemical recipes that evolved to survive the leopard and the ice storm, but we are trying to run the software of the 21st century. The body does not know that we have invented the stock market. The limbic system does not know that we have invented the internet. Deep within the marrow, deep within the ancient reptile stem of the brain, we are still waiting for the sun to set, waiting for the tribe to gather, waiting to read the weather of the soul on the faces of our kin. And in this new world, the ancient adaptation of the tear, that weapon of peace, that signal of trust, has found itself in a strange and hostile territory. In the brutal calculus of the modern industrial world, the tear has been rebranded. It is no longer seen as a heroic signal of cohesion. It is seen as a malfunction. We have entered the era of the mask. Consider the day in the life of the modern human. Let us observe a man in a high-rise office, overlooking a city of millions. He is wearing a suit, a modern armor designed to project competence and invulnerability. He is in a meeting. The pressure is immense. His livelihood, his status, his ability to provide, the ancient anxieties of the provider, are on the line. A conflict arises. He feels the sting of criticism, or perhaps the overwhelming weight of a failure. In the Pleistocene, this feeling would have triggered a signal. The tears would have risen to solicit support, to de-escalate the aggression of the alpha, to bond the group. But here, under the fluorescent lights, the rules have changed. To weep in the boardroom is to lose. To show vulnerability is to be labeled unstable or weak. The corporate tribe does not hug the weeping member. It often expels them. And so the man engages in a violent internal act of suppression. He tightens his jaw. He looks away. He forces the water back. He dons the mask of the modern, the stoic, unreadable face of efficiency. But the body remembers. The body rebels. To understand the physical cost of this suppression, we must look at the anatomy of the stifled cry. We have all felt it, that painful, constricting lump in the throat that rises when we try not to cry. We call it the lump, but in medical terms, it is the globus sensation, or globus pharyngeus. It is a ghost of the savannah, haunting the modern throat. Here is the biography of that lump. When the brain perceives distress, the hypothalamus sends the signal to cry. This signal is part of a larger autonomic response. The body thinks it is in danger. It prepares for fight or flight. It prepares to scream, to run, or to wail. To do any of these things, the body needs oxygen, massive amounts of oxygen. And so, the nervous system commands the glottis, the opening between the vocal cords, to expand. It pulls the throat wide open to allow the maximum intake of air. This is the scream prep. It is a reflex as old as the first vertebrate. But the conscious mind, trained by the modern culture of stoicism, slams on the brakes. It commands the glottis to close. It commands the muscles of the throat to swallow, to suppress the sound, to hide the signal. The lump you feel is the physical war between these two commands. It is the glottis trying to open to save your life, and your swallowing muscles trying to close to save your face. It is the tension of the glottis expanding against the contraction of the swallow. You are literally fighting your own anatomy. You are choking on your own evolution. This battle is not just in the throat. It is in the chest, where the diaphragm spasms, the hitch of the breath that we try to smooth out. It is in the eyes, where the orbicularis muscles twitch, trying to squeeze the lacrimal glands shut. It is a full-body exertion. To not cry requires as much caloric energy and muscular tension as lifting a heavy weight. And what becomes of the river that is dammed? The chemicals of solace, the leucine and kephalin, the ACTH, the manganese, are not expelled. They remain trapping within the system. The cortisol continues to circulate. The stress is not purged, it is internalized. The internal weather turns stormy. The pressure builds. We see the result of this suppression in the epidemiology of the modern world. We see it in the rising tides of anxiety, of hypertension, of heart disease. We are bodies designed to release, forced to hold. We are vessels of the ancient sea that have been sealed shut, pressurized by the expectations of a society that values the machine over the animal. This suppression has driven the act of crying into the shadows. In the Paleolithic, crying was often a public, communal act. The tribe wept together. But in the modern world, we have privatized grief. We have created hidden caves where we can take off the mask. Picture the woman driving home in the rain. She is in her car, a capsule of steel and glass moving through the artery of the highway. She is surrounded by thousands of other people, yet she is completely alone. The stress of the day, the emails, the deadlines, the isolation finally breaks the dam. She begins to weep. She cries in the car because it is soundproof. She cries because she is moving, a ghost in transit. She cries because the windshield wipers mirror the action of her own eyelids, clearing the view for a moment before the rain obscures it again. This is the modern cave, the interior of a sedan, illuminated by the red brake lights of the traffic ahead. Or consider the shower. How many modern humans have wept in the shower? It is the perfect camouflage. The water of the pipes mixes with the water of the eyes. The sound of the spray masks the sound of the sob. It is a return to the aquatic hypothesis, a moment of nakedness and water where the defenses can finally be lowered. But unlike the communal bathing of the past, this is a solitary ritual. We wash away the salt of the tear before anyone can see it. We emerge clean, dry, and composed, the mask back in place. This privatization of tears has a cost. It robs us of the mirror response. When we cry alone, we do not trigger the empathy of the tribe. We do not get the hug, the hand on the shoulder, the sharing of the burden. We get the chemical release, yes, but we miss the social recombination. We bear the weight of the stone entirely alone. And yet, the paradox of the modern era is that while we hide our own tears, we are surrounded by the tears of strangers. We live in the age of the screen. Through the glowing rectangle in our hands, we are exposed to a constant global stream of tragedy. We see the faces of weeping mothers in war zones on the other side of the planet. We see the grief of earthquake survivors. We see the fictional sorrow of actors in high definition. Our ancient brains are confused by this. The mirror neurons fire, we feel the phantom pain, but we cannot reach out. We cannot wipe the tear, we cannot offer the food. We are empathetic witnesses trapped behind glass. This creates a state of empathic distress, the pain of feeling without the agency to heal. We are overstimulated and underconnected. We are awash in the visual signals of the tribe, but denied the tactile comfort of the touch. This is the great tragedy of the mask. We have built a world that connects us informationally, but separates us emotionally. We have mistaken communication for connection. We have mistaken the like button for the embrace. But the biology is stubborn. It is patient. It waits. Despite our best efforts to be efficient, to be rational, to be dry, the tear persists. It breaks through the cracks in the armor. You see it in the airport arrivals hall, where the veneer of civilization cracks under the pressure of reunion, and businessmen weep into the necks of their partners. You see it in the movie theater, where the darkness grants a temporary amnesty, and the audience weeps together in a synchronized release of repressed emotion. You see it in the quiet desperation of the therapy room, where the modern shaman, the therapist, grants permission for the mask to fall. The persistence of the tear is a reminder of our resilience. It is a rebellion of the soft animal against the hard world. It is the body saying, "I am not a machine, I am alive, I feel." We must also consider the evolutionary duality in this new context. The vulnerability of the tear, once a signal of safety, can now be a liability. In a world of anonymous interactions, of internet trolls and competitive workplaces, showing weakness can be dangerous. The predator is no longer a leopard. It is a rival who sees emotion as incompetence. So the cost of crying has gone up. But the cost of not crying has gone up even higher. The cost is the numbing of the soul. When we suppress grief, we also suppress joy. When we flatten the valley of sorrow, we flatten the peak of ecstasy. We become flat-lined emotional beings, functioning but not truly living. The tear is the bridge back to our humanity. It is the liquid link between the Stone Age and the Space Age. When we allow ourselves to cry, we are honoring the ancient contract. We are admitting that despite the skyscrapers and the satellites, we are still small, soft beings who need each other. There is a movement, slow but growing, to reclaim the tear, to see it not as a failure of the modern self, but as a triumph of the ancient self. To view the globus sensation not as something to be swallowed, but as something to be listened to. It is the voice of the ancestor in your throat, asking to be heard. As you navigate the concrete canyons of your life, remember the origin of the water in your eyes. It is older than the concrete. It is older than the city. It is older than the language you speak. It is the ultimate truth teller. Tonight, if you feel the pressure building, if you feel the tightness in the throat, do not fight it. Do not swallow the signal. Find your private cave, your car, your room, your pillow, and let the mask fall. Let the river run. In that moment of release, you are not weak. You are connecting with a lineage of survivors who learned, over millions of years, that the only way to endure the hardness of the world is to remain soft enough to flow. The mask may be necessary for the day, but the night belongs to the tear. The night belongs to the truth. And as we peel away the layers of the modern, the suit, the schedule, the screen, we find that underneath it all, the heart is still beating by the light of the first fire, waiting to be seen. And so, we arrive at the final threshold. We have traveled from the dust to the sea, from the cave to the city. We have seen the tear evolve from a washer of eyes to a washer of souls. Now, there is only one place left to go. We must turn to the listener. We must turn to you. For the story of the tear is not just a history lesson. It is a mirror. It is time to look into the ocean of your own soul. And so, we arrive at the present moment. We have traveled across the vast, shifting continents of deep time. We have walked through the swirling dust of the Pliocene rift, stood beneath the crushing weight of the glacial ice, and huddled in the flickering amber light of the first hearths. We have witnessed the slow, agonizing, and beautiful architecture of the human face being carved by the elements and by the demands of love. We have traced the river of the tear from a simple washer of grit to a carrier of the most profound human truths. But now, the journey brings us to the most important destination of all. It brings us to you. You are resting now, perhaps in the quiet of your own sanctuary, the darkness of the room wrapping around you like a soft, protective fur. The noise of the modern world has retreated, leaving only the steady rhythm of your own breathing, a sound that echoes the first breath of the first ancestor who walked upright under the African stars. Tonight, you are the focal point of this history. You are the summit of the mountain we have been climbing. Every mutation, every tear shed in the dark, every silent signal sent across a campfire has led inexorably to this moment, to your body, and to the liquid that waits behind your eyes. The journey of the tear is the journey of humanity itself. It is a narrative written not in ink, but in salt and water. It is a story that moved from the reflexive cleansing of dust, the simple biological need to see the predator in the grass, to the profound expression of the soul. As you lie there, feeling the weight of the day slip from your shoulders, consider the miracle that resides within your skull. You possess a mechanism, forged in the fires of survival, that allows the invisible to become visible. You possess the alchemy to transform pain, which is a ghost of the nerves, into a substance that can be touched, wiped away, and shared. Think of the sheer biological wonder of this. Emotions are abstract. Grief is a firing of neurons. Joy is a cascade of dopamine. Fear is a spike of cortisol. These are invisible storms, trapped within the fortress of the cranium. But the tear breaks the seal. It allows the internal weather to rain down upon the external world. It allows one person to say to another without a single word, "I am hurting, and I need you." It allows the silence to speak. Tonight, as you drift toward the velvet embrace of sleep, let us strip away the modern context of the tear. Let us forget the boardroom and the traffic, the emails and the screens. Let us look at the tear through the lens of deep time, as a testament to your complexity and your endurance. You are not a machine that malfunctions when it leaks water. You are a masterpiece of adaptation. Consider the landscape of your own face in the dark. The skin, sensitive and heat-radiating, is the canvas. The eyes, closed now, are the windows that have seen millions of years of sunlight and shadow. And the lacrimal glands, resting quietly above the eyes, are the guardians. They are the descendants of the glands that washed the volcanic ash from the eyes of Australopithecus. They are the same glands that wept for the dead in the Neanderthal caves. They are ancient heirlooms, passed down from mother to daughter, from father to son, in an unbroken chain of weeping that stretches back to the dawn of our species. You are the descendant of those who knew how to signal trust. In the brutal calculus of natural selection, those who could not connect, those who could not signal their vulnerability, were lost to the silence. They died alone. But your ancestors, the ones whose blood now beats in your wrist, were the ones who dared to cry. They were the ones who lowered their shields. They were the ones who blurred their vision to stop the fight. They survived because they were soft. They survived because they knew that true strength is not in the hardening of the heart, but in the yielding of the spirit. When you feel the prick of tears, you are feeling the handicap principle in action. You are feeling the urge to surrender sight for safety. It is a biological memory, a reflex that says, I trust the world enough to close my eyes. I trust the tribe enough to show my pain. Even if you are alone in your room, the instinct remains. You are signaling to the ghost of the tribe, to the ancient protectors who stand watch in the corridors of your DNA. You carry the ancient savannah within you. The salt in your blood is the memory of the mineral-rich earth. The reflex to scan the horizon is the memory of the lion. But you also carry the shoreline. The theory of the aquatic ghost, that dreamlike whisper of our coastal past, lives on in the saline stream of your tears. When you cry, you are returning to the primordial soup. You are dipping into the reservoir of life that birthed us all. You are a body of water, held together by surface tension and skin, controlled by the tides of emotion. In the deep relaxation of sleep, we can imagine our ancestors standing knee-deep in the ancient surf. The sun is setting, casting a long golden road across the water. The air is warm and smells of salt and iodine. They stand there, the waves lapping against their legs, looking out at the horizon. The water of the sea meets the water of the eye. There is no separation. The tear that falls from their cheek is indistinguishable from the ocean that surrounds them. It is a seamless connection between the inner and outer worlds. This is the truth of your nature. You are a vessel of the ancient sea. You are a container for the vastness of feeling. And sometimes the vessel becomes too full. The rains of life fall, the rivers of memory swell, and the dam must break. This is not a failure of the vessel. It is the design of the vessel. We are designed to spill over. We are designed to flow. Think of the chemistry of solace we explored. The leucine and enkephalin, the natural painkiller that flows in the tears of grief. As you lie here, your body is capable of manufacturing its own morphine, its own comfort. If you have cried today, or if you feel the need to cry, know that your body is preparing a healing potion. It is mixing the ingredients of relief. It is flushing the manganese, the stress hormones, the toxins of the day. It is preparing you for rest. The leveling off that follows a cry is the body's way of tucking you in. It is the physiological equivalent of a mother's hand on your forehead. It is the all-clear signal after the danger has passed. The storm has broken, the rain has fallen, and now the earth smells fresh and new. And what of the glue of the first fires? That social bond that held us together through the Ice Age. It is present in the very safety of your room. You can sleep tonight because you are safe. You are safe because humans learn to protect one another. We learn to build walls, to keep the fire lit, to watch over the vulnerable. The tear was the mortar that held those first communities together. It was the signal that said, "Do not leave me." And the tribe answered, "We will not." The security you feel now, the warmth of the blankets, the solidity of the roof, these are the technological descendants of the empathy forged in the cave. We built civilization to protect the soft, weeping animal at our core. We built a world where it is safe to close our eyes. But even in this safety, the grief of the cognizant lingers. We know time is passing. We know that sleep is a small rehearsal for the long silence. This awareness gives the night a poignant quality. But the tear teaches us how to handle this too. It teaches us that grief is the price of love, and that memory is the bridge across the abyss. The tears we shed for the past are the way we honor the ghosts. They are the libations poured on the altar of history. By remembering, by feeling, we keep the past alive. And so, we come to the mask of the modern. You have likely worn it all day. You have worn the face of competence, the face of strength, the face that does not leak. You have held your breath. You have swallowed the globus sensation. You have fought the ancient signal. But now, the day is done. The audience has gone home. The lights are dim. You can take off the mask. You can hang it by the door. Here, in the sanctuary of the night, you do not need to be a soldier. You do not need to be a machine. You can be the animal again. You can be the soft, breathing, feeling creature that evolved under the stars. If the tears come now, let them. Let them be the river that carries you into sleep. Let them wash away the dust of the modern world, the harsh words, the bright screens, the relentless pace. Let them restore the blurred, soft focus of the surrender of sight. You do not need to aim at anything right now. You do not need to focus on a goal. You only need to be. Visualize the internal geography of your body one last time. See the limbic system, that glowing coal in the center of the brain, dimming its light. See the hypothalamus, the conductor of the storm, laying down its baton. See the neural pathways, those silver threads of connection, quieting down, humming with a gentle, restorative vibration. See the lacrimal glands, the silent sentinels, standing guard. They have done their work. They have kept your vision clear. They have signaled your needs. They have released your pain. They are the unsung heroes of your biography. Now, imagine that you are lying on the bank of a great ancient river. It is the river of humanity. It flows slowly, deep and wide, under a sky thick with stars. The water is warm and salty. It is made of the tears of every human who has ever lived. The tears of the first hominid who looked at the moon and felt alone. The tears of the hunter who lost the trail. The tears of the mother who held her child. The tears of the lovers reunited. The tears of the builders, the dreamers, the mourners. You are part of this river. You are a drop in this vast flowing current. You are not isolated. You are held in the suspension of the species. The river carries you. It supports you. It moves you gently toward the great ocean of rest. The ocean in the soul is calm tonight. The surface is like glass, reflecting the cosmos. The storms of the limbic system have passed. The winds of the Rift Valley have died down. The ice of the Pleistocene has melted. There is only the gentle rise and fall of the tide, matching the rise and fall of your chest. Breathing in, you draw in the air of the present. Breathing out, you release the history of the past. You are the victor of this long story. You are the one who survived. You are the one who made it through the bottleneck of the ages. And you did it not by being hard, but by being able to weep. You carry the badge of the tear, the diamond of the eye, which proves you are human. Let the eyelids grow heavy. Let them seal the internal ocean. The waters of the day recede, pulling back from the shore of your consciousness, taking with them the debris of worry and thought. The tide is going out. It is leaving behind a smooth, clean sand, a blank canvas for the dreams of the night. You are safe. You are connected. You are whole. And in the silence of your own genome, In the quiet spaces between your heartbeats, the ocean waits. It is patient. It is deep. It is the source of all your healing. It is the timeless witness to the beauty, the struggle, and the profound miracle of being human. Sleep now. The tribe is watching. The fire is warm. The water is still. Drifting, drifting back to the source. Back to the ocean. Back to the peace that was there before the first tear was ever shed. Sleep.